friend of ours who is a local investigator named Melinda Leslie. And we've been seeing a lot of, I guess the best way to describe them are amber balls of light, which have been coming up from an area called the Sycamore Basin, or Sycamore Canyon. And Sycamore Canyon is one of the larger canyons in the area. I believe it runs about 27 miles from the base of the Mingus Mountains up toward the Flagstaff or Williams area. And very, very vast area. The Sycamore Basin itself is measuring the width, more or less, of the area that the Sycamore Canyon goes through. And at its widest, I believe it's about 7 miles wide. And the past few months, we've been spending a great deal of our time investigating that area because of the anomalous activity we've been experiencing there, and others. As recent as last weekend, we were at Bradshaw Ranch on Friday with, and it's usually just Alexander and myself. We prefer to do just, most of our investigations, just the two of us. But in this particular case, a friend of ours from work who has a small group of people that we know, they like to get together on occasion and more or less, we call them stakeouts. We'll sit in our lounge chairs and just watch. We watch everything on the ground, we watch the sky. Excuse me. And on this particular evening, we were late. Most of our friends had gotten there before us. And we sat with them for a while watching the sky. It was a very comfortable night. And I believe it got to be probably around 8 or 8:30. And one of our friends had to leave. She brought her children with her. When she left, there were 8 of us left, including Alexander and myself. We happened to be facing from where we were at in the parking area at Bradshaw Ranch. We were facing the main house, the fenced-in area that the Sega project is set up in, and looking more or less beyond the house, you see 2 prominent features from where we were, which is looking to the north. I'm sorry, I guess it would be the northwest from where we were. You see to the right, over the houses from where we were at, a feature called Casner Mountain. To the left of that is a deep gap between Casner Mountain and the next mountain, which is Black Mountain, and that gap is called Sycamore Gap, because you can leave the Sedona area and go down to the Sycamore Canyon between those 2 mountains. And that's generally the direction we were watching last Friday. And at approximately 9:20, I believe it was, about 9:15, 9:20, we saw an orange ball of light come up over the center of Casner Mountain, which was obviously coming up from the Sycamore Canyon side. And all of us saw it all at the same time. Right? We heard all these oohs and ahs as everybody looked up at it. And it was rising up at a pretty accelerated rate. And it seemed to be growing in size and in brightness. And as it rose above the mountain, it suddenly cut a hard right angle, which obviously traditional aircraft cannot do. And so again, all of us realized we were seeing this anomalous activity that so many have seen. And as it cut a hard right angle, it's now heading north. And then it started to fade out and disappear. Once it winked out and disappeared, everybody was very excited. And then I turned to one of the guys that was standing next to me. He's a retired colonel in the Army. He said, "That's the darndest thing. I've never seen anything like that." And as we were talking, one of the ladies behind us said, "Oh, look, there's another one." We turned and looked to the north again, northwest toward Casner Mountain, and roughly in the exact same area, in the center of Casner Mountain, another orange ball of light rose in almost the exact same spot. It did the exact same thing as the first one did. It went straight up, grew very bright, grew in size, then cut a hard right and started heading north. Did the same thing, faded out and disappeared. And one of the other ladies that was there looked at her wristwatch when it disappeared. And again, everybody got really excited. And as we were talking again, somebody again said, "There's another one." And another one came up in the exact same spot. And the lady that looked at her watch said, "That was exactly 30 seconds after the first one, or the second one disappeared, that the third one came up." And so, having made a note of that, when the third one disappeared, we all looked at our watches, and then a fourth one came up. And we saw a total of 23 of these large balls of light that were orange or amber in color. And I should actually say that of the 23 lights, 3 of those lights were actually white when they came up from behind the mountain. So 23 lights total. Of the 23, 3 of them were white. And 4 of them cut off to the south. So we had the different directions that were cut. All of them cut a hard angle, whether it was to the right, which would be the north, or to the left, which was the southwest, which of course the traditional aircraft cannot do. So that night, after the last one disappeared, we waited another 30 seconds thinking maybe we'll see a 24th one. We did not. What we did see were 2 helicopters rise up from the basin, and the 2 helicopters, it was too distant to tell if they were military helicopters, but I'm assuming they were probably Blackhawks. That's what we usually see out in that direction. The 2 helicopters went to the southwest, so they cut off to our left from where we were and headed toward a mountain called Woodshoot Mountain, which is on the far side of the far west side of the Mingus Mountain Range, headed southwest from where we were observing them. And this has become a very, very common sighting. My friend that does UFO tours, Melinda Leslie, she has tours almost nightly. And this phenomenon caught her eye, what was it, September, I believe it was? Last September, approximately September 27th, she called us, and she's not a very excitable person. But this particular night when she left the message, she was very excited. And she said, the 2 of you need to come out here right away. I'm on the edge of town at the cultural park. If you get this message, please come out here right away. I'm here with my clients. And we're seeing something that I want you to see. And of course, we were not able, it was a work night for us, so we weren't able to go out that night. And I think 3 nights went by, and all 3 nights she left the same relative message at the same time, saying, I need you to come out here. Well, Thursday night came by, and we were not working the next day. And she called again and said, can you come out here? We said, yes, we can. So we met her and 2 of her clients at the cultural park. And she said, you know what? I want to see if I can get closer to this phenomenon I'm seeing. She said, you just wait and see this. She said, there's military helicopters and these amber balls of light. I really want you to see this. And she said, let's see if I can get closer to them. I said, where are they? And she pointed to the southwest. She said, they're over there towards Sycamore Canyon. I said, okay. She said, what I want to do with these clients is see if they're willing to go to a place called Bill Gray Road. And Bill Gray Road is closer to Cottonwood. And it goes directly to, it's a dirt road, very rough. It goes directly to the base, the eastern base of Black Mountain. So it gets quite a bit closer to Black Mountain, and immediately on the other side of Black Mountain is Sycamore Canyon. So her 2 clients were very agreeable. They were out-of-state visitors. She explained briefly what she had been seeing every night. And she gestured to us. She said, these are my friends. I want them to witness this as well. And she said, you have a pretty good chance of seeing it because this is happening roughly the same time every night. And so we followed her, and she was in a hurry because she said she didn't want to miss the beginning of these craft coming up from the ground. And when we got to a spot, and it was an unmarked spot, everything on Bill Gray Road is just rural. It's kind of a web of dirt roads. She parked along the side of the road. And even before the dust was dissipating from her shopping, she leapt out of her car, and she got to the back of her car and opened up 2 of these cases that she keeps her night vision goggles in. And she has custom-made night vision goggles that she passes out to each one of her clients. And the first 2 she gave to Alexander and myself, and she said, you remember how to turn these on, right? And we said, yes. And as soon as we got them turned on, she pointed toward Black Mountain. And she said, what I want you to do is to watch the southwestern side of the mountain, the left shoulder. I said, okay. And as soon as Alexander and I got the night vision up to our brow, Alexander said, oh my gosh, there they are. And what she was seeing when we looked through the goggles were the silhouettes of Black Hawk helicopters. And she called them out. She said, there's Black Hawk helicopters over there. They're just hovering. And when I got the goggles focused where I could see, I saw them too. And she started counting them out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think you counted out, how many was it? 11? 17. There were 17 of them that night.
Wow.
And you can imagine, it's very expensive for any government agency to put a Black Hawk helicopter in the air for any reason, whether it be training or a military operation. They're very expensive to maintain and very expensive to put in the air for any operation. Even 1, let alone 17. And here's 17 of them. They were hovering not very high in elevation above the Sycamore Basin, and they were evenly spaced, as if they were waiting for something. And so a short, I didn't even think it was 10 minutes of us watching these helicopters. We then saw the first ball of light come up from the basin floor. It was amber or an orange color, just like she's described it would be. And it got so bright as it rose up that we had to take the goggles away from our face because there was when you're looking through the night vision goggles, if something is even relatively bright, it'll be almost blinding in the goggles. And these were blinding, so we had to take the goggle away from our face as it, what she calls, powers up. It's very bright and big. And then it started to dim again, and we were able to put the goggles on our face. You could see it with the naked eye. And as it dimmed, it started to move off toward Woodchute Mountain and over Woodchute Mountain out of sight in the direction of the very small community of Paulden and Chino Valley. So as we continued to watch, a second one came up. That was the second one came up almost in the exact same spot, and just like the first one, it got really bright to a point where we had to take the goggles away from our face, and then it started to get dim again, and it almost appeared like it was changing shape. I don't know what shape it was taking because it was kind of fluctuating. It would almost seem like it was a elongated shape, and then we go back to kind of a spherical shape, but it was getting dim. Now that one broke away and went to our left, which was headed southwest again, followed the route of the first one, and went over Woodchute Mountain. In that particular case, two of the helicopters that were hovering in the Sycamore Basin area broke formation and followed it, almost as if they were escorting it or following it for some reason. And we watched the two helicopters disappear with it over the mountain. And finally, Melinda said, "Oh, that's probably it for the night." She said, "Let's stay and watch for a little bit longer," which we did. The other helicopters went away, and we turned to her and said, "Okay, what do you think about that?" And she said, "Well, something's going on because this is every night." And she said that it's not like the usual UFO activity that I see. She said, "I've seen structured craft." She keeps a very strict record of what she sees and dates and times and everything. And she said, "This is different. This is not like anything we've seen before. It's always in the same place." She said, "In most cases, if we see structured craft or craft and formations, it's not in the same place." She said, "I think this is something that's probably man-made or reverse engineered because it's working in conjunction with the Black Hawk helicopters." And I told her I would agree. I think that's probably what's going on. So fast forward to, of course, you've talked to Tom Doggo. Tom was having a get-together with some friends, a number of which were from out of state. And we met at Bradshaw Ranch, and his group of friends were there. It wasn't a very big group of friends. I want to say probably 10 people altogether, about 10 people. And we were very honored to be there amongst the group of friends that Tom had there. Very nice people. We got to talk to them and walk around the ranch, and Tom was not feeling well. So he had to leave early. And then the second day of the get-together, they had rented a campsite, more or less at the base of the Mingus Mountains, between Cottonwood and Clarkdale, which is along the Verde River. And so we met down there, and again, Tom wasn't feeling well. So the gathering went on for a short time with Tom, and then Tom went home, and then it continued with a group of his friends. And we were talking about the recent phenomena that we were seeing in the Sycamore Canyon area. And one of the gentlemen was there, said, "Oh yeah, there's an underground base over there." And I said, "What did you say?" He said, "There's an underground base over there. There's actually several installations over there." And I said to the man, "What makes you say that?" He said, "Well, I used to work there." And he thumbed over his shoulder and said, "Hang on just a second. This is very specific information that you're saying, and very specific to me, because this is something we've been investigating recently in our recent area of interest, specifically is that area." He goes, "Well, yeah, that area is an active installation." And I said, "Is it military?" And he said, No, it's not military. It's private contractors." And I asked the man, "If you don't mind me asking, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, I worked in security as a security agent for the Central Intelligence Agency for a number of years." He said, "When it came to my time to retire from the CIA, I started my own private military contract company." He said, "When I first started, I went back to my old bosses to see if they could get me some work," which they did. So they sent me to Las Vegas, where at a small airport, I got on a small, very small jet with two other men who had private military contractor companies of their own. They said we flew right there. He thumbed over his shoulder toward the Sycamore Basin. And at this point, I was mind-boggled that, we're just getting into this investigation. We're now meeting a whistleblower who's actually worked there. And he said, I went in with these gentlemen on this plane. And the plane, he said, do you know what a Harrier jet is? And I said, yes. He said, well, back in 1987, not too many people knew what that type of jet was. He said, we flew to the Sycamore Canyon and landed on a elevator that was camouflaged to look like desert floor. He said it lowered us into a sub-level that was a large hangar. And we taxied over to a spot next to some other vehicles. We were taken off the plane and led to a small office inside the hangar with 3 chairs that were waiting for us outside. He said it was a pretty simple operation. We each took turns sitting. We were each ushered into the office. We each did our pitch to the company that was looking for security. And then we were told if we were going to be utilized by the company, we would get a call. He said, as it was, I was the one that got the call, and I returned with my team there and provided security for just over a year and a half for that company. And so here I'm listening to this guy, and I'm very excited that he's sharing this information. And I said, can you tell me another thing? Which company did you work for? And he said, sure, I'll tell you. He told me the name of a company that makes optical devices for the U.S. military. And I think they actually also subcontract a few other Western European countries for optical devices, which they use in planes, in drones, in armored vehicles, and so on. And specifically, their most recent contribution to military hardware has been optics and drones. And so the name of the company, when I was trying to remember it, I had not heard of it until he mentioned it. And he said I also worked for, and he named another company. So he worked for 2 companies that were working under the desert, hidden under the desert in the Sycamore Canyon and Sycamore Basin area. And he said it's probably a lot bigger now. He said, mind you, that was back in the mid-1980s. So 1987 is when I started there. And so it also made it clear to me that these companies have been operating in the Sycamore Basin for a very long time. And so I thanked him, and this man also now lives in Thailand. So he's retired from doing this altogether, and he's moved to Thailand, which I guess is why he's not too worried about talking about what he was talking about.
Wow.
Now, mind you, Tom wasn't there at the moment. He wasn't feeling well, so he left early. And when I talked to Tom the other week, I said, I'm mind-boggled by your friend. My name is Brad. He goes, oh, yeah. I said, I didn't realize that he was a private military contractor and started to say, he goes, oh, yeah. He said, I've known him for a very long time. And my first question to Tom was, so he's legit? And he said, absolutely. He's 100% legit. He said he's not one of those people that has claimed to work for a Central Intelligence Agency. This man has credentials and can prove everything he's done. And so we were very excited because it's a very long stretch when you hear people talking in the Sedona area about underground bases. In fact, when I first moved here in 1999, one of the rumors that you hear as a local that usually causes a pretty good stir of laughter is, in addition to the excessive amount of UFO activity in the Sedona area, is military activity and underground bases, which I thought was hilarious. When I was first told about that, I laughed at it, and I'm no longer laughing at it now. One individual actually went as far as saying, the UFO activity that makes this area famous. He said, of course, some of it is extraterrestrial UAPs. He said, however, the majority of it is, maybe even as much as 90% of it, is reverse engineered UAPs that are being tested out of the Sycamore Basin. And so it seems that the center of this activity, for the most part, seems to be the Sycamore Basin. Though the canyons are also involved in it as well, the canyons that are just north of the Bradshaw Ranch. And so this has been the focus of a lot of our investigating recently. And we've had a lot of people come forward, which was incredible. We had one more whistleblower that contacted us recently after I was on Coast to Coast AM. This is the second time I got to go on with Connie Willis, and we were talking to her about this investigation. And unlike the first time that I was on, they did what they call the wild card hour, which is when people can call in from Canada and the United States. And the first caller, I remember before we did any callers, I said, I wonder if any whistleblowers will call, or any other witnesses. And she said, oh, sure. She said, even if they don't get through on the phone, she said, you'll get contacted. Don't worry about that. I said, well, that would be great, because that would really help the investigation if we could have more whistleblowers and more witnesses who have seen this stuff talk to us. And the very first caller that was picked on the wild card was a man who introduced himself, said that he used to build houses for a profession in the Verde Valley. And he built his own house in a small neighborhood between Clarkdale and Cottonwood. And the neighborhood that he built his house in more or less faces the lower portion of the Sycamore Basin. He described having a sliding door in like a patio with a big glass window that faced the Sycamore Basin. And he said, and I can almost quote him now, he said, you know, he said almost every night when we would get up in the middle of the night and we would look into that area, he said we'd see these orange balls of light coming up out of Sycamore Canyon. And he said sometimes it was even weirder because there'd be helicopters with them. He said it got to be so common and sort of strange that one night I woke my wife up and we're watching all this activity in the Sycamore Basin. And she said, come on, let's go. And she goes grabbing her keys. He said, what are you talking about? She said, let's go. Let's go see what this is. So they drove, which is it's a very long drive to get in there. There's one road to get up there, which you have to kind of go up Mingus Mountain into the very small mining town of Jerome, and then out on a road called the Jerome-Perkinsville Road. Once you're on that road, it descends into the Sycamore Basin through a little, I guess it's a ranch called Perkinsville. And it's still a ranch today, though it's not owned by the Perkins family. And it was so remote that I'm told that Mr. Perkins had to arrange to have his own zip code there so that he could actually get his mail. So they made it Perkinsville, even though it's not an actual town, so he could have mail delivered by rail and mail picked up by rail, so he didn't have to drive all the way to Jerome or Cottonwood to pick up his mail. So even today, just as it was then, this Perkinsville is just a small ranch on the river. And once you cross over the river and climb into the bluffs beyond that, you're then officially into the Sycamore Basin area. And that's the source area where this activity has been coming from. Well, this man said that he and his wife had drove out there, and then he said, you know, Jeremiah and Tommy, he said there's a road out there that once you get past Perkinsville, if you go out there at night, they will stop you and turn you around with guns and not let you by, and they will tell you to go the other way. And so I knew exactly what he was talking about, because that area, we had actually rented a Jeep both last May and the May prior to get very deep into the basin area, because the roads are just so bad that you have to have not just high clearance in a vehicle, but extra high clearance, because there's places where you have to go across dry washes that are very deep, and the vehicle literally has to climb out of the dry wash to get on the other side. And there's nobody out there. It's a very barren but beautiful patch of desert, and extremely rough terrain. And so when you're out there, and when we were out there at both times, we're wondering, you know, how do you hide such a vast operation underground out here? And I remember reading a lecture from an NAU professor, and he was talking about the hundreds and hundreds of miles of lava tubes that flow south from Flagstaff from the San Francisco Peaks and under this very area. He said proof of that is in the sinkholes that have collapsed, one of them being the famous tourist site here in Sedona called the Devil's Kitchen. And he said those tunnels are literally miles and miles and miles upon miles of a vast web of underground, you could call them roads. And we were theorizing that it sounds like a possibility that's, what could you call it? You could call it unutilized real estate, so to speak.
Wow.
Where if you were going to hide something and you needed to be discreet about it, that you could utilize some of these underground lava tubes. And it made me think of being back home in Pennsylvania, because we had in southwestern Pennsylvania, one of the largest belts of coal in the country. And so the different types of coal mining operations, particularly longwall coal mining, left extremely large caverns underground and real estate that was not being used. And the government did, in fact, buy some of those old coal mines, and they would shore up the ceilings, and they would store files, they would store vehicles, they'd store a number of things in these caverns that were made by longwall coal mining in Pennsylvania. So it was proof to me that, yes, in fact, the government does buy underground territory from mines. In this particular case, if they're lava tubes, they don't have to buy it at all. They would just find a place where they could enter it, expand it. If they were unsure of the ceilings, they would have to shore them up somehow. But it would be very hidden and very useful underground real estate. And going back to Bradshaw Ranch and all the paranormal activity there, at one point in time, Bob complained to one of his neighbors that he was getting a little tired of his house shaking at night, and his windows rattling, and his dogs being scared away. And the neighbor said to him, what are you talking about? And Bob said, well, they're expanding that underground military base over there in the secret mountain area, and they're expanding it in my direction. It's expanding into my home, and it's rattling my house, and I'm getting tired of it. And then he got quiet, because I think he realized he was saying more than he was supposed to be saying. And that became another focus of attaching point A and point B and point C, so on. The operation also extended in the direction of Bradshaw Ranch. And Bob was actually one of the people that somehow knew of it and even mentioned it to another rancher. And we met John Bradshaw briefly and his son Mason. Very, very nice people. It was kind of a random meeting. We were part of the investigation that was done for Mr. Brandon Fugel with the Beyond Skinwalker TV series, and they appeared on the investigation, and Alexander and I helped him up a little bit with the investigation as well. And we really wanted to meet them. But I remember meeting some of his employees at one point for his Jeep tours, and I told him it's something I'd like to meet John Bradshaw. One of the employees said, "Oh, he's quiet, kind of a quiet man, and he doesn't really like to engage on the supernatural happenings that were going on his father's ranch and his ranch when he was running it." I said, "Okay, I can respect that." Well, when we stopped by, and we got to talk to him and his son Mason, and I apologized. I said, "I don't want to barge in on both of you, but I've been really wanting to talk to you both." And Mason said, "Well, we were really wanting to meet and talk to you and Alexander as well." And I said, "I feel like I'm intruding because I was told by one of your employees that the two of you don't like to discuss the paranormal activity on the ranch." And I remember Mason kind of laughing. He said, "That's actually not true at all. We love to talk. We're not in any way antisocial, and we'd be happy to talk to you." So we ended up sitting and talking to him for probably about an hour and a half. We had a very good conversation in regards to most everything, a little bit of the history of the ranch, the history of his family, and a little bit of the history of the area. And as it was, that was last October. And John's very active with the community in Sedona, and he was just that night, I think it was the opening ceremony for the Sedona Oktoberfest, and he was on the council. So he said, I'm sorry, I said, I really want to visit with you both some more, but I really have to go. I'm about to open up the festivities for the Oktoberfest. So we left it at that and agreed that we'll meet again to talk more about it. But he had a lot to say, specifically about the possibilities of something going on underground at the ranch. And when we brought it up, John's the kind of guy, when you look at his face, he's always smiling, but he's got a very serious and makes eye contact. He's got a very trustworthy demeanor. He puts you at ease. So he's a very nice man. And he became very serious, and his smile kind of faded away. And he said, he said, there's a cement plant in Clarkdale. He said, I'll say this. He said, when that cement plant opened, it was the biggest giver of jobs to the community in the area. He said, but we started to notice strange things about it. And I said, well, what's that? And John said, well, he said, most of the earth that they were moving from the cement plant is being placed on trucks. He said those trucks were supposedly going to contribute to the building of the dam up there on the Nevada-Arizona border. He said those trucks were coming through Sedona, which was a big deal then because people didn't want to hear a lot of noise. He said, but the strange thing was, for years upon years, those trucks would pass for Sedona. He said it was one truck every 5 minutes. He said, so do the math. They're moving enough earth that you would think an entire mountain had disappeared. But if you traveled around the cement plant, there was barely any earth moved. He said, so where was that earth coming from? And I said, okay, I follow you. I follow what you're saying. When the Beyond Skinwalker team was here, they hired a private contract company that does ground scanning with a very, very sensitive ground penetrating radar. And their team came, and they asked me, you've been looking into this for a long time. I said, yeah, about 10 years we've been investigating the paranormal activity in the area. And they said, well, we want to cover that. We want to talk about the paranormal activity, but we also want to cover the underground base ideas. And I was kind of surprised because most people aren't interested in that and seldom even ask about it. And I said, okay, I don't know a whole lot about it, except there's a lot of government properties that were originally private ranches that the government seized from the ranchers in the area. And the circumstances vary, but in most cases the story is much the same. That then shoots would show up to these certain ranchers in the area. Two of them were pioneer families that have been here a very long time. And they're all in the relative vicinity of the Bradshaw Ranch. So the Bradshaw Ranch was not the only property that was seized. There were 4 other ones up that way that were also seized in much the same way. And roughly around the same time. It wasn't all at the exact same time, but around the same time they made these strange deals with the local ranchers, including the Bradshaw family. Worked it out that a sum would be paid, non-disclosure agreements would be signed, and then these properties would then be occupied by government employees. And the Bradshaw Ranch is not the biggest property either. There's a larger property that's well over 100 acres. I think the Bradshaw Ranch covers between 75 and 90 acres, which was originally Old Man Hancock's property. It's a beautiful spot. If you, Brent, when you come here, we'll gladly take you over there. The property is nestled in kind of a bowl of a valley where there's a confluence of 2 dry washes from Lincoln Canyon and another one that comes from Loy Canyon. And the rush of water that comes through there during monsoon or during a winter snowmelt carved the little valley that the Bradshaw Ranch sits in. And so there's hills all the way around the Bradshaw Ranch. And when you look to the north, you can see the towering red rock walls of the canyons. And then also due north from Bradshaw Ranch, you'll see what looks like a kind of a pyramid of a formation, and that's the Loy Canyon, Loy Butte. And so there's a lot of landmarks you can see all the way around the ranch, and it's very easy to see why Bob Bradshaw got the idea to build an old West town and to rent it out to certain movie productions, because the backdrop from his ranch is just stunning. It looks like the classic John Ford movie set when you're there. Now, the government, when they took the property, burned the movie set, which had been used in well over 100 TV commercials and TV shows and feature movies. It's gone. All that's left there now is a kind of a empty ravine with high grass that's about waist high. And when Brandon Fugle's investigative team was here, and they brought the guys from Terra, which do the ground radar scan, they asked me, once they got through asking about the paranormal activity, they said, we understand you have a theory about where there's some tunnels around here. And I said, well, I have theories, and that's about it. And they said, what makes you think you know where it's at? And I said, well, I don't. It's deductive logic. And I said, the deductive logic, what I mean by that is there are certain places where I know there's government fences that have signs saying you can't cross over those fences. And then a distance from there is another property that's rumored to be an entrance to an underground facility that's very large. And I said, that's actually almost 17 miles from here in Clarkdale. And if you draw a straight line from these places up here to that, I have an idea of where the tunnel would be. And so they had a map out, and I drew a line on it, roughly where I figured the tunnel would be. And that was it for the day. They got what they needed from me. But shortly after that, they had this contract company come from Terra, and they had a very neat device. It was a drone that had kind of a boom that was hanging under it with the radar. And what it would do is they could pre-program it to fly a grid back and forth. And it would make a square grid, more or less, of an area. They kind of mowing the lawn, going back and forth as it went, and covering very vast amounts of territory with this ground-penetrating radar. It was very sensitive. It could go very deep underground. Excuse me. And I didn't know that they had found anything because they had also signed non-disclosure agreements, and they had to keep everything, all their findings to themselves until the show aired, which was completely understandable. But what they did find was in the same area where we suspected that there was a tunnel, they found a 50-foot diameter tunnel that was going right under the Bradshaw Ranch.
Oh, wow.
That was, a particular area was in where the old movie set had been. I'm sorry, Brent, you were going to ask a question.
Oh, I just wow. I suppose as a host, I haven't really said a whole lot, but you have this so many details, and you got such a grasp on the whole situation, and of course you've spent a lot of years at this now, and wow, it's you're blowing my mind here. It sounds like some sci-fi flick, you know, or something.
It really does. The whole thing, I was saying to Alexander, I said, you know, as of this last August, we've been investigating the area for 12 years. I've lived here since 1999. I moved here from southwestern Pennsylvania and arrived in the Sedona area in September of 1999. She got here, what was it, 97? In 1997, before me. And we met in 2002. And it was 12 years ago that we really started delving into the paranormal activity around here, specifically because of Tom Doggan. We read his book, and I was so mind-blown by his book, and I wanted to meet him, so we reached out to him. He was so very kind. He said, let's meet for lunch. And so we met him for lunch and talked to him about how we'd like to look into the area ourselves, and he started very, very unselfishly sharing pointers about do's and don'ts about investigating the paranormal activity in this area. And that's one of the incredible things about Tom is how willing he is to mentor and share. At that time, when we met him, we were not investigators in any way, shape, or form. And I had paranormal experiences that I was very lucky to have back in Pennsylvania. In September of 1991, I was lucky to be with some of Stan Gordon's guys in PASU when two Bigfoot creatures jumped down the forest in front of us. And I was only 14 at the time. And I was so shocked and so scared at the time. I think 3 days went by where I couldn't sleep because my adrenaline was just so, it was rushing. But I'll never forget one of the investigators who witnessed it with me, a very big man named Devin. He knelt down beside me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, Jeremiah, he said, do you know what the odds are for someone your age to witness not one but two Bigfoot creatures? And I said, no, I don't. And this man was very much by the numbers, a classic scientist. And I don't remember the statistic he gave, but it was some astronomical number. He said, you must remember this for the rest of your life and remember how lucky you were that you were standing beside us to see this. And I said, no, I would never take for granted that I saw this. And after that, I thought, well, as scary as it was, now I want to see it again. There's a strange feeling that comes about where curiosity drives you, where you want to see more. You want to prove to yourself, yes, I definitely saw that. Even though it was such a blatantly obvious sighting, I wanted to see more. I wanted to experience it again. Not realizing that moving to Arizona, that I had even more incredible sightings of multiple types of phenomena when I got here. And that's one of the real strange oddities, or geographical oddities about the Sedona area. You'll see people write about it, or in some cases documentaries or TV shows will almost say tongue-in-cheek with a bit of sarcasm, well, the people that want to see spirituality and mix a little bit of the bizarre UFOs and cryptids, go to Sedona, Arizona. And it sounds funny at first, but if someone has lived here long enough, and more specifically, spent a lot of time outside, you most certainly will experience not one, but a number of the different types of paranormal phenomena that go on here. And I think that's one of the big things we've had friends of ours ask, how is it that the two of you experience so much? And I tell them, well, we don't have a cell phone, so we're not constantly sitting down looking at a cell phone. We spend very little time online. We never go to the movies. We don't really watch TV. All of our free time is spent outside investigating. We would rather be outside in the field experiencing this phenomenon and if we can, understanding it, than we would be sitting inside, sitting in our duff, watching TV. And that has actually really paid off. We've spent, over the 12 years now that we've spent investigating, we would be at Bradshaw Ranch once or twice a week. And honestly, Brent, the majority of times when you go out, nothing happens. So we'll go out there even when it's freezing cold. And Alexandra's very prepared, like a Boy Scout. She brings out an electric heated blanket. We have our 2 gravity chairs that we sit in. And we'll carry all of our gear up onto one of the hills around Bradshaw Ranch, and we'll put a heated blanket over us that's battery powered, and then a tarp over top of that, and we kind of hunker down and listen for the night. And most of the time, nothing happens. But on the nights when something does happen, it's mind-blowing and mind-boggling. It keeps driving you to go back to see more. Now, in the case with these guys from Terra, when they got their results for the tunnel, this section of tunnel, it was 50 feet in diameter, it was running in a straight line under where the old movie set used to be. That inspired a lot of other investigators to start looking into them. And there's a new investigation which is now ongoing, and I'm not permitted to mention it by name or who it is just yet. They came out, I think it was in May, and then again in June. And I think they're probably going to come back again. And their investigation was so well funded. I think they mentioned to me that they were spending $27,000 a day in their investigation there. And they too brought a ground penetrating radar. And they asked me before they got here, it's a foreign crew, they came from out of country. They said, would you mind coming up with some targets on satellite imagery where we might find some entrances to these underground facilities or more of the tunnels? I said, gosh, there's a lot of places I suspect where there's underground tunnels. So sure, so I made up a set of screenshots of Google Earth Pro of areas where I suspected that something was underground. And I can't remember how many emails to them back in April, before they got here, April and May. And they said, well, we won't have that much time to hit that many targets. Would you mind resending them and prioritizing them in the most likely target to the least likely target? I said, sure, I can do that. So I narrowed it down, and I rearranged it to where I was very certain that there was something underground. And of course, the very first target I picked was at the Bradshaw Ranch, and on the ranch property immediately next to the old adobe. And the reason I picked that spot is because if the straight line was continuous towards Secret Mountain from where Brandon Teagle's team found a relatively straight line, 50-foot diameter tunnel, then naturally that extension of that tunnel would go through this section over the old Bradshaw Lane right past the old adobe. It would be on the eastern corner of the adobe. So I marked that as target number 1. So when the crew came, and they had their men with the radar ask, well, can you show me exactly where your first target is? Because I can see on the map here it's roughly in that direction. I said, absolutely, sure, just a moment. So I walked over to the spot on the lane, and I said, starting right about here, and I walked approximately, I think, 25 paces, maybe a little bit more. And so I stepped out of the way, and their ground radar expert turned on his device, and he started walking along, and he started calling out, cavity, cavity, cavity. And as he kept on walking along, he kept on calling out cavity. And his device was handheld. It kind of looked like an old, well, it reminded me of the old World War II era mine detectors. It had a very large dish on the bottom. but what made it very different was it had like a giant iPad screen attached to the boom, so that the person holding it could look down the iPad screen, and he explained to me later the iPad screen would show him what type of material was under the ground. It would show where a cavity was, and then if you walk back and forth over the section of cavity, it then maps out the cavity in its depth, and you can actually turn the image on the screen and look at it in 3D. And not only can you turn it and look at it in 3D, it will also show you metals. So if there are I-beams or rebar that strengthen the concrete in the tunnels, they would actually see that too. And sure enough, what they found in that first target was a section of approximately 71 feet of cavity right under the lane. And I told them, I said, this makes sense because when this facility was being expanded in probably the early 1990s, when Bob Bradshaw complained to one of his neighbors that his house was shaking and that the windows were out. And they had 5 ranch dogs. And the ranch dogs were relatively fearless. They had encountered the Bigfoot creature. They had encountered a lot of the anomalies that frequented the ranch. And the dogs had gotten relatively used to a lot of it. And Linda was able to trust the dogs at night to alert her before a lot of things would happen. So she would watch her 5 dogs, and if they stood up and their tails would start to sag, she knew to turn her camera on because the dogs would sense something coming before she did. In this particular case, when this drilling or expanding of the cavity under the ranch was going on, the dogs were being scared away. And it might take a day or two for them to come back to the ranch because the sound of whatever was going on, the vibration of whatever was going on under the ranch was absolutely frightening to them. And so I knew there had to be a section of underground tunneling very close to the ranch buildings themselves, especially if the water pipes were rattling and the windows were rattling. And as it was, I was spot on with my first target that I picked. And again, that was just easy deductive logic because to draw a straight line from where Tara found their first section of tunnel a year earlier, and I'll have to send you a map for better reference, Brent, because where the movie set was is in a little valley that would be, I guess it would be on the southeastern side of the ranch. And it's probably about a quarter of a mile from Bob Bradshaw's ranch house and also the original adobe structure. And so the first scan, which was done a year earlier by Brandon Siegel's team, was on the old movie set, about a quarter of a mile away from the ranch house. And then this recent investigation, they did their scan on the first target I picked, which is right by the old adobe. And so that made a lot of sense to me. But then I got another kind of epiphany, because after Beyond Skinwalker came out, I think literally 12 hours after the first episode aired, Alexander and I were doing some grocery shopping in a local grocery. And while we were in the grocery store, there was a lady that came up to us, and she grabbed my sleeve and she tugged on it. And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, I recognize you. I just saw you on TV last night. And I said, "Oh, you watched the show." I said, I hope you enjoyed it. And she said, "Oh, gosh, I sure did." And she said, it made me think right away. My sister went out to Bradshaw Ranch on a tour, and she said, "Boy, did she have something happen." And I said, "Well, would you mind sharing with me? What happened?" And she said, "Well, you'll never believe it." She said she was out there, and she said this strange time anomaly thing happened where they seemed to be repeatedly going over the same section of the Bradshaw Lane over and over again until everybody got a strange headache and they panicked. She said also while they were there, they found a ventilation pipe along the Bradshaw Lane. And I said, "Hang on, what do you mean a ventilation pipe?" And she said, "Well, there was a pipe coming up from under the ground, and it appeared to be coming from deep under the ground, and it looked like it was an air shaft or something bringing ventilation to the ground." And I said, "Does your sister still live in this area?" And she said, "She does." And I said, "How long ago did she find this ventilation pipe?" And she said, "Oh gosh, the time anomaly and the pipe when she was on this tour," she said, "that was about 6 years ago." And I said, "Well, I'm sure you can speak for her. I hope you can. Would she be willing to talk to me?" And she said, "I'll do you one better. Give me your email address. I'll contact her." And she said, "I'll see if she's willing to meet you out there, and she can show you." And I said, "That would be even better yet." So, long story short, we did arrange to meet with her. And we met them, and they followed us out to the ranch. And we got to the ranch, and she was explaining this bizarre time anomaly that happened to her and the tour. And she was very comforted to know that in all the years that we were investigating there, the time anomaly happened to us as well. Not in the exact same spot on the ranch, but probably about 200 meters from the lane where she had her experience. And we were lucky when this time anomaly happened to us that there was a very large group with us, the same group that was with us last weekend, to witness the 23 UAPs, was there at that particular time and experienced this strange time anomaly, which put us in kind of a repeat. And some of us appear to be doing the same thing over and over again, even though we didn't. We just did it once. So we had this lady and her sister walk us through what had happened. And then we got to the point where I said, can you show me where this ventilation pipe is? Because I've got to know the ranch pretty well. And I said, we also walk the desert around the ranch to get familiar with it. I'm very familiar, and I've never come across a ventilation pipe. And she said, oh gosh, you don't have to walk far. It's right along the side of the lane, close to the adobe. And so she walked us up to some trees, by which time it was getting dark. And she said, I don't want to go in there, but she said, it's right there under that tree. I said, that's good enough for me. I'll be able to find it if it's in there. We'll come back tomorrow and look at the site. So we had the information we needed from this lady who had witnessed the ventilation pipe and the time anomaly. And we returned the next day, and Alexander and I went through all the bushes and all the trees along the side of the lane and started specifically where she pointed and found nothing. Whatever was there has now been taken apart and hidden and probably cemented over. And I wasn't surprised, because it seems that when people do come across these things, they're taken apart, cemented over, and camouflaged. Because I had another witness account of two men that worked for a Jeep company, a tour company here in town, and both of them had a day off and decided to go to the area close to Hanonki, which is about 2 miles due north of Bradshaw Ranch. And they wanted to hike in the open desert between the forest road that terminates around Hanonki and go to the south in the direction of Bradshaw Ranch. It's about 2.5 miles to the ranch across this very undulating terrain and rolling hills between the north end of the ranch and where Hanonki is in the road. So these two men were walking across the desert. There's no trails, no path there. And as they were conversing and talking, one of them called out, hey, look at that. And both men looked, and they saw what looked like a pipe sticking up out of the ground. It came up to about chest level on these two men. And it was painted camouflage, so it had a little bit of a terracotta color. It had greens to match the desert floor and the flora and fauna of the desert floor. They both walked up to this pipe, and they looked down into it, and it was just black. It went straight down, and they couldn't see in the bottom. Neither of them had a flashlight. It was during broad daylight. And one of them said, what do you think that is? And the other one said, I don't know. It looks like a ventilation pipe. Maybe it goes to a mine. Maybe there's a mine shaft nearby, and they needed oxygen. It looks like it's been here a while. And as the two men just stood there looking at this pipe, discussing it, they heard a voice call out behind them from the direction they had come. And they turned around, and standing behind them were two men wearing coveralls. And the coveralls were very clean, immaculate. The two of them, from walking through the desert, were dusty. The red dust that comes up off the ground here, if you're wearing clean trousers, will cover your ankles, your shoes, and even come up as far as your knees. And so you can always spot hikers around here, because they'll return to town and come into a grocery store to get water or one of the restaurants, and they've got red dust from the knees down and all of their shoes. These two men noticed that the two men that called out to them, wearing coveralls, had no dust on them, and more frighteningly, they both had M4 carbines, and they both had military-style sidearms, military-style haircuts, and Oakley-style sunglasses on. They both turned and looked at these men who had called out to them, stunned, not knowing what to say and wondering where these men came from. And the first man with the M4 carbine said, you two gentlemen need to leave this area immediately and go back to the direction you came. This area is a government area and you are trespassing. One of the men from the Jeep tour said, no, it's not. This is Bureau of Land Management. we're both locals. We get tours here. We know darn well where the Forest Service land is and where Bureau of Land Management land is. This is BLM land. You can't take us off this land. And the man said again, I'd rather not repeat myself. If I have to help you leave, you will leave. You two gentlemen must leave this area right away. And the second man got a bad feeling. He's seeing these two men with perfectly clean coveralls. There's no patches. There's no name tape. There's no insignia. They both have guns. And he tugged the other man's shoulder. So let's just go. Let's listen to what they say. Let's get out of here. So they both listened. They both walked away. The two men behind them with the coveralls and the firearms disappeared. They just vanished. They both walked back to the Jeep, and they're both stunned. First of all, they saw this ventilation pipe that was camouflaged. In the moment that they're looking at it, two men show up and say that it's a government area and that they're trespassing and they have to leave. And so they're stunned at that, too. They both know darn well where they're at. They give tours of the area, so they know the topography and the layout of the land in the Sedona area very well. That area more so because most of the Jeep tours go out to the monkeys, so they're very familiar with the area. They both leave, and the one man who's a little bit more belligerent wants to go back and photograph this vent pipe. So he comes back the next day, and he's 100% certain of the route that they took and the hill that he saw this ventilation pipe on. Now, mind you, again, this is the very next day.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Brett, I'm sorry.
I just said okay. Sorry.
So he's walking back through the desert, and he recognizes the area that they were in. He gets to the spot where he was sure the ventilation pipe was, so they're less than 24 hours before, and it's gone. There's no evidence of the ventilation pipe being there, so he's so stunned. He's looking around for footprints. He's looking around for any evidence that work has been done, labor has been done, tools have been brought in to remove this massive pipe, and there's nothing. There's no evidence of anything having been done. He literally finds himself feeling silly because he's stomping on the ground trying to find a hollow spot or a hollow sound coming from the ground, and to no avail. He finds nothing. So he gets a really bad feeling and he leaves. And he and his friend decide to remain quiet about that because they realize that these people, number one, have the power and wherewithal to detect that they were there and found this ventilation pipe within moments and asked them to leave. Then not only to ask them to leave, but to make the ventilation pipe disappear overnight. What else can they do? So the two of them were very chilled by this experience and they left. And of course, they had both heard rumors of underground bases. They had heard the very common occurrence, which Tom Dongo wrote about in his books, about people going into the canyons at night and running into what they described as military men in camouflage, sometimes with their faces painted black, carrying M16s or submachine guns and body armor, and telling people they had to turn around and go away. It was a government operation, and the area was closed, and not to come through. It would happen so often. And I think I'd have to ask Tom Dongo again, but he actually came up with a statistic because he had talked to so many witnesses who had run into these guys in the backs of the canyons. They said that he believed that of the hikers that go into the canyon at night annually, that there was a certain number of them. I think he came up with something like 1 in 1,000. And I don't want to quote that exactly because I'd have to ask him to make sure I was right. But he actually came up with a statistic because he interviewed so many people who had run into these guys that he believed it was approximately 1 in 1,000 that go out in the canyons at night would run into these guys that appear to be military and would be carrying firearms, sometimes camouflage, sometimes in just plain coveralls. They would turn people around and make them go the other way. Now, I had my own encounter in that same vicinity where these two men found the ventilation pipe when I was regularly going out on the weekends with Alexander and myself for our usual nighttime investigation. And my mother, who had retired, wanted to go to the ranch every Sunday morning. So Sunday morning I would get up, even before the sun would come up, and she and I would drive out to Bradshaw Ranch. And then we started walking around the ranch, and from there she said, why don't we start walking around the desert? And I said, I want to do that too. I want to get to know this area very well for the investigations. On one of those walks, it was an early summer morning, we walked due north into the Loy Wash, headed in the exact same area where these two Jeep tour men had parked when they had their encounter. So So we're coming from the opposite direction, from Bradshaw Ranch, heading north. And we're walking through the Loy Wash, which is really pretty. There's no trail. The only trails you'll see there are from some of the free-range cattle that pass through there. And they like to congregate in the shade of some of the larger trees that are in the wash, and so you can see cow paths in there. And we walked all the way up to the forest road, which is 525, which terminates at one of the larger ranches just past Ananke. We turned around there and came back. And all the canyons in the Sedona area have a kind of atmospheric thing that during the day they inhale. I'm sorry, during as the sun's going down, they inhale and pull the air into the canyons. And then in the mornings, as the sun comes up and it gets warmer, they exhale. And the breeze, you'll feel a stiff breeze when it happens, and the air changes direction. So by day and night, the air is going in a different direction. So as we were coming back, the sun is now up, and the breeze shifts and is coming toward us. And as we were walking through the canyon, I could smell a really strong smell of sweat. And I turned to my mother, I said, "Do you smell that?" And she said, "What is it?" And she had her dog with her, and I said, I smell sweat. Somebody's sweating really bad. They must be really close because I can smell it. And I told her, I'm dirty. I hope there's no hikers around here. I don't feel like talking about what we're doing out here. If we see somebody coming, let's just kind of walk around them and let them be. And she agreed. And shortly after I said that, I saw a flash of white in front of us down in the area we were headed to, toward Bradshaw Ranch. And so we both stepped off the side of the canyon and climbed up the side of the canyon slightly and just sat down behind some undergrowth. And as these people came closer, I saw three men in white coveralls, and they had Oakley-style sunglasses on, and they all three had military haircuts, and they were spread out. There was one closer to us, one in the center of the canyon, and the other one was just at the base of the far wall of this Loy Wash Canyon that's north of Bradshaw Ranch. And as they got closer to us, I saw that the man in the center had a German Shepherd dog, and they were tracking us. And I turned to my mother and I gestured for her to cover her dog's muzzle so the dog didn't growl or bark, which she did. And as they got right below us, the man in the center raised his hand and clenched his fist. And as he did so, all these men went down on one knee, very quietly. And the dog seemed to be sniffing the ground. Then he signaled them all again. They stood up and continued on to the north. And I turned to my mother and signaled for her to wait. And after they were out of sight, I whispered to her, "That's really creepy. Let's get the heck out of here." So she agreed. And we quickly went back down into the canyon and hastily went back toward Bradshaw Ranch. I assumed when we got to the ranch that we would see a vehicle with government plates parked there, because that's the direction these men came from. When we got back to the ranch, only our car was there. There was no other cars in sight. And I thought, okay, well, maybe they parked along the lane. Maybe they parked on the top of the knoll. As you leave Bradshaw Ranch, the lane going in from Forest Road 525 is a little over a mile long. It's a very long lane. And it climbs, as you're leaving the ranch, it climbs a very steep hill, which is called the Bradshaw Knoll. It's also called the Hartwell Knoll on maps. You get to the top of the knoll, and there's a little parking area where a lot of the Jeep tourists go even today. And there's a beautiful view from the top of the Hartwell Knoll. Then you go down the far side of this hill to the east, and it connects with Forest Road 525, which you can take back to Sedona, or you can take back to 89A going to Cottonwood. And we passed no other vehicles on that lane. So I have no idea where these men with the German Shepherd dog came from. And to this day, it's a mystery to me. And it's even more of a mystery because they were wearing pristine, clean, white coveralls. What were three men in white coveralls with a German Shepherd dog going just north of Bradshaw Ranch in that canyon? To this day, it's somewhat frightening. I don't know what they were doing, but it appeared to me that they were looking to confront us and probably ask us not to come in there anymore. And I'll never know because I never saw these gentlemen again. But it was in the back of my mind, the encounter that the men from the Jeep company had, running into men that they said were wearing coveralls. Now those men had M4 carbines and sidearms. The men that I saw, I couldn't see any firearms on them, but they were wearing pristine white coveralls.
Well, that's
So
another
something
thing.
very, very strange.
Yeah, that's another thing. You hear these stories about the Men in Black, and how they have these new clothes and their car looks like it's, even though it's an older model, it looks like it just came off right out of the factory.
Yes,
And
yes, and that's another phenomenon which does happen around here. And I'm glad I have not encountered the Men in Black phenomenon around here, but it's usually not a positive encounter. When people have encounters with the Men in Black phenomenon here, it's usually not a positive. Now, we interviewed one witness who we met just by chance. I was talking to one of our friends in our small investigative group, and we were all working that day. And we were speaking briefly about when we would be meeting again. And as we were talking about the bizarre military activity or military-like activity in the area, we noticed that there was a man that was eavesdropping on us. And as my friend looked at his wristwatch, he goes, "Wait, I got to go. We'll talk more. We'll get together soon." And he nudged me with his elbow, said, "By the way, that we're being listened to. That man's eavesdropping on us." And so I saw that. So we started to go our separate ways, and this young man who was listening to us took 3 or 4 very fast steps toward me and put his hand out and said, "Excuse me, excuse me." He said, "I apologize, but I couldn't help but overhear. I was listening to your conversation." And I turned around. I probably sounded a little bit sarcastic. I said, "Yeah, I can see that." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry. I apologize, but he said, I don't think what you're saying sounds crazy at all. I had my own encounter 10 years ago." And I said, "Well, you got my attention. Would you mind sharing it with me?" And he paused probably for like 10 seconds. And he had a very strange look on his face. He goes, I actually haven't told anybody about this. I was so scared, and I still am. I've not spoken about it for 10 years. So this happened 10 years ago to me." And I said, "Well, if you're uncomfortable, you don't have to, you're not obligated to tell me anything." But I said, as it is, I'm investigating the strange phenomena in this area, both the paranormal phenomena, cryptid sightings, and as it is now, the military activity in the area. And I said, what we were talking about was the military activity. So is that what your encounter involved? And he said, yes. And I said, well, if you wouldn't mind, I would really like to listen to what you have to say. And you can say this in complete confidence. If you'll let me share your story, I would gladly share your story respectively in the detail that you tell it. And I won't divulge your name and your identity. And he said, well, that's fine with me, but he said, these people threaten me, so I really would be appreciative if you don't share my name. So I said, well, I do want to talk to you, so let's meet, because I can't now, I have to go to work. Let's meet and let's talk about this. So that, long story short, this young man did meet with me. And he said, I used to be a bodybuilder when I was in high school. He said, it was my hobby, 2 hobbies. I like to ride my dirt bike in the desert, and I like bodybuilding. And he said, in my high school year, I weighed 200 pounds. It was 200 pounds of solid muscle. He said, I had a pickup truck, and I would put my dirt bike in the back of the pickup truck, and I would drive to areas where it was legal to ride a dirt bike. He said, as it was at this time, I drove to a really remote place where I could go down to this canyon. It was about 6 miles into Sycamore Canyon. And right away, as soon as he said that, he had my attention, because I knew that area is full of this very bizarre military encounters that people had claimed to be having, and also claims of a military underground base. And he said, I unloaded my dirt bike, started it, and so I started down into the Sycamore Canyon. And he said, again, I was about 6 miles in. He said, there's nothing in there. It's a very remote, very rugged area. He said, as I was riding my bike down toward the canyon, somebody shot at me. And he said, the bullet must have gone right past my head because I heard this cracking sound. And he said that my first instinct was to just crash my bike. He said, I rolled my bike, which is a very heavy bike, because I didn't want to get shot at again. And he said it pinned me on the ground, and I was in a cloud of dust. And he said, when the dust was clearing, I saw 2 Humvees pull up right in front of me. And out of these 2 Humvees came all these soldiers. And I said, how many? He said, I think there was about a dozen of them. And he said they had helmets, they had M16s, they had handguns. And he said the first guy ran over to me and rammed his knee into my chest. And he put the muzzle of his gun right in my face. And he said, don't move, you almost died. I almost killed you. And he said, I was so scared, I put my hands up and I told him, I'm so sorry. I didn't know I was trespassing. Please, I'm so sorry. I'm just a kid. And he said, I was rambling on about, I'm about to graduate high school. I'm just a kid. Please don't hurt me. And they told him to be quiet. The man that pinned him down then frisked him shoulder. Another man came up behind that man, took the wallet, and walked back to the Humvee. And he said he doesn't know how much time passed, but it wasn't long. The man that took the wallet back to the Humvee started walking toward him, and he started saying his address, his home address. He named his parents, which were his adopted parents. He named the previous adopted parents and their address, and the names of his previous adopted siblings. The man was trying to make a point of, we now know everything about you. So apparently in the Humvee they had an uplink where they could run his driver's license and find out as much relative information about him as they could. The man took the wallet and threw it back down onto this guy's chest. Mind you, he's still pinned under his motorcycle, and he's pinned under the knee of this first soldier who jumped out and pinned him down. And he said, look, we're going to let you go. And he said, but if you tell anybody about this, and you think we won't know, and then he held the ID up between his forefinger and his thumb, and he waved it kind of menacingly in the air. He said, we will know. So he said, you'll keep this to yourself. And he said, do you understand? And he said, yes, yes, yes. He said, guys, I'm so sorry. I didn't know I was trespassing. And they said, just be quiet. And he gestured for the man that was pinning him down to get him up. And this man, according to the witness, with one arm, he had one arm on his rifle, the free arm, he reached down and grabbed this kid who said he was 200 pounds at the time, and pulled him out from under the motorcycle with one arm and pulled him up to the standing position. He was so full of adrenaline at the time, he didn't know that he had a cracked rib, and his clavicle was also cracked from this man ramming his knee into him so hard. But it wasn't from rolling the bike. It was from this man he described as a soldier ramming his knee into him and pinning him down to the ground. And so he's looking at these men who are now just blankly staring at him. And this man said, now get out of here. And they didn't give him back his ID. They kept his ID, but they gave him back his wallet. So he shoved his wallet back in his pocket. And he got on his motorcycle. He said, I remember thinking, oh, God, I hope it starts. Because he didn't want to be stuck there with these men any longer. He kicked the starter. The motorbike sputtered to life. And he started going back to the direction he came, just like we said. And so he's climbing up these switchbacks to the gap where he parked his truck. And he said he didn't remember how far he got, but curiosity got the best of him. He turned around. He stopped the bike and turned around to look back in the direction where these men were. And he said he saw in the side of one of the red rock walls a door. There was a very large door panel that was open. And there was just a black chasm. And the two Humvees drove down into it. So when they went into the wall, the back end pitched up into the air, and they went down at a very steep angle under the ground. He said, while I was watching, both of them went into this, and then this door slid across behind them, and it was camouflaged to look like red rock. It blended perfectly. You wouldn't know there was a door there. He said, then I got really scared, and I looked back forward again and started my bike up the hill. And he said, I got the bike into the truck, and he said, by that time when I had to get the bike up, I realized I was injured. He was injured very badly with the cracked clavicle and the cracked rib. And he said, the one thing that stands out, I asked him if he had any more detail to share. He said, the one thing that stands out is when I looked at them all before I started my bike, he said, I'm looking at their eyes. He said, their eyes didn't look human to me. And I said, that's interesting. So I made a note of that detail. And my first instinct was to tell Tom Dongo about it. Because Alexander and I would meet regularly with Tom for lunch. And we would share. We would just update him about our investigation of if we found tracks at Bradshaw Ranch or if we had photographs of something that showed up at Bradshaw Ranch. And so we would meet with him for lunch and we would share things of our investigation. In this particular case, I got on instant messenger with Tom that night. And I said, Tom, you're never going to believe this. I said, I just met this man who 10 years ago said that he was 6 miles into a canyon, and these military guys shot at him on his motorcycle and his dirt bike. The bullet barely missed his head, and I told him, I recounted the whole story in typing to Tom, and Tom interrupted the typing by sending me, I know where it happened. It's Sycamore Canyon. And I reread what I had typed already, and I realized I hadn't typed Sycamore Canyon. Tom was so keen to reading what I said. When I said he was 6 miles into one of the canyons, Tom deduced from saying 6 miles in from other witnesses who were 6 miles into Sycamore Canyon who had also encountered these paramilitary type guys, that that's where it was. And so I remember pausing and telling this kid's story. I said, Tom, how the heck did you know that? And he said, that's a very scary area. He said, I don't go into that area, and I know other people have had encounters with these military types in that area. He said, I simply don't go there, and I don't recommend that anyone else does either. And up to that point, I had never been into that portion of Sycamore Canyon, neither had Alexander. And so I continued to tell Tom the rest of this young man's story, and told him that, he had not spoken about it for 10 years. He was so frightened. I said, have these men ever shown up, or any men shown up since then, to check on you? And he said, absolutely yes. And I said, well, what where at, what do they look like? And he said, they show up from time to time, usually out in public. And they said, they say things to me to remind me that they're watching me and to remind me they know who I am. And I said, can you tell me when the most recent one was? He said, sure. He said, just a few years ago, I was at the Walmart in Cottonwood. He said, I was in one of the aisles by myself, and he said, 2 men in suits approached me from both ends of the aisle and walked up to me. And he said they were wearing black suits, and he said they were very pale. And right away, I thought men in black. And he said the one man came up to me and called me by name. And he said, he called me by his first name. He said, how are you doing? He said, I looked at them, and I got a bad feeling, and I said, I'm doing okay. Can I help you? And the man said, we just wanted to see how you were doing, make sure you were okay. And he said they said it in kind of a menacing way. And he said, I'm fine, and I'll be fine, thank you. He said they stared at him for a moment, then they turned around and walked away. And he overcame his fear, and he wanted to see what kind of car they were driving, where they went. But the 2 men had completely vanished. He had no idea where they went. He was quick enough in reacting that they couldn't have left the store without him seeing. He got out to the parking lot, saw no hint of where they were, didn't see them at all. And he said, that's the kind of encounters I've had with these men since. And I said, do you worry, having told me about this, that they'll come back? And he said, they may, but he said, I trust you not to use my name and say any more detail regarding my identity or my family's identity or my adopted family's identity. I said, no, that will stay in confidence just as we agreed. But that type of stuff does happen here, and it's usually not a positive encounter. So when people run into these paramilitary types, it's not a pleasant encounter. Now, Alexander and I had our second encounter, of all places, in the most touristed of all the canyons, which is Boynton Canyon. Boynton Canyon has a resort called Enchantment Resort in the mouth of the canyon, a very popular resort and spa, the Miamo Spa. And the canyon itself is just beautiful. It's a beautiful canyon that if you follow the trail doglegs from the north to the west, and then it terminates at a sign that tells you it's the end of the trail. But it's kind of a ruse. The actual canyon itself has many mini canyons that branch off of it. And the main branch of the canyon goes quite a distance past where the canyon ends. There's at least the sign, the official Park Service trail sign says that the canyon ends. And Alexander and I were deep in the forest in that canyon, climbing up on the side of one of the cliffs to document a monocellular cliff dwelling that we spotted from the opposite canyon wall with binoculars. And as I was climbing up to it, I realized the latter part of the climb was a sheer climb, and I didn't have any rope with me. So Alexander waited below, and I climbed up to this cliff dwelling, and I documented the dwelling itself and some beautiful pictographs that were beside it. And I shouted down to Alexander that there are pictographs here, and I got them, and she was a little angry at me because she wanted to see them herself. But I said, we'll come back in a week. We'll come back in a week, I'll bring a rope, I'll deploy the rope, and I'll help you get up here. And as I was climbing down, I heard voices to the north of us. And north from that spot is the end of a box canyon with extremely high walls. The walls there are about 700 feet and higher, and they're sheer. Very, very, very rough terrain. And we heard, there's no trail, by the way, either. There's no trail going in there. There's a thicket, which is very difficult to get through. And then there's a dry wash. And it's also very narrow and thicket growing over top of that to some places where you have to really duck or even crawl to get through it. We saw no tracks at all going in there. And so here we're hearing 2 voices to the north of us. It sounded like a male and a female voice talking. after they finished talking for a matter of seconds, we heard a loud metallic boom, like a hollow boom. And I looked down below me on the cliff wall, and I could see Alexander looking up at me. I said, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "What was that?" And she said, "I don't know. It was two people talking and then a loud boom." And so we paused and we listened for a little while longer, heard nothing but complete silence. And I started climbing down again, and then I paused because I heard the voices again. I could hear a male voice and a female voice to the north of us, followed by a loud metallic boom. So we heard it a second time. And we both stood still and listened for a while, heard nothing. And so I told her, "That's very strange. Well, what could possibly be up there? There's nothing up there but forest and rock and cliff wall. There's nothing up there." And so, curious at that time, we thought, well, we'll be coming back next week. We'll get a better look around. And so, exactly a week later, we made the very long hike back in there again, and I brought a rope, and we went back up to the same cliff dwelling, and I deployed the rope, helped Alexander get into this cliff shelf where the dwelling was, well over 500 feet up the canyon wall. And we were looking at the same site that I'd seen a mere week earlier. We were satisfied that we'd seen enough and we were going to leave. And as we were leaving, looking to the north, I noticed something was different. Something didn't look the same as before. And there had been an avalanche of rock in the same area where we were hearing the voices coming from. It was a very strange, localized avalanche in one spot. And I told Alexander, "That's really strange. That's the same area we heard the voices earlier." And it was right around the same time of the COVID closure. So we had a lot more time to do our exploring at that time and investigating at the ranch because the place that we work had put everybody off on paid leave because of COVID, which is I want to say that was in March of 2020.
Okay.
And so here was that right? March of 2020, I think? Yeah. And so we were puzzled. We're looking at this strange avalanche, not knowing what to make of it. And we packed up our gear and started out in the canyon again. And I remember telling my boss, who works in that canyon, about what we'd seen. And she listened intently. She said, she said earlier this week, two Apache helicopters flew in the canyon. And she said they had rockets on them. They looked like they were fully armed. And she said they were so low, they were below the canyon walls. They flew into the canyon, and she said then we all thought we heard explosions. I said, wait. Where did you hear the explosions? And she said, well, the north end of the canyon. And I said, so you think that these helicopters had something to do with these explosions? She said, I don't know. It just so happened that after the helicopters were on site, we heard explosions in that direction. And at that time, that particular hotel was closed. The only people that were there were security on the property, and then people in leadership who had to go in and check emails and such. And then they would return emails for people telling them that the place is closed and so on, and then they would leave. And so this happened in the brief little bit of time during the daylight that she was there. And luckily she's a friend of ours, and knew that we were investigating all the different types of strange phenomena around here, including the military and paramilitary phenomena that was going on. And I said, do you have any more detail than that? And she said, nope. She said, we heard them coming. The building was vibrating, so we all went outside. We looked up and we saw two Apache helicopters flying north. And I said, okay, that's very strange. So Alexander and I were going way out in the science fiction direction of hypothesizing what, could these helicopters have actually done something, maybe fired rockets at the wall where this entrance might be, and maybe they buried it. And so the stretch of it was, the longest stretch of it was, we thought, well, there's one way to find out. We'll take our drone back there, and we'll fly the drone right over the debris, and if it was some type of explosive device or rocket, we should be able to see pieces of rocket amongst the debris. And our drone shoots in 4K, very good high definition, so we'll be able to find out. So we go back in there with our drone, and again, it's a very long hike to get in there. We found a place where we could launch our drone. We got 3 complete flights of the drone over the avalanche area, landed the drone, packed it up, by which time it was getting dark. In fact, it gets darker in the canyon because the canyon walls are so high the canyon runs north to south. So in the morning, when the sun's coming up in the east, you still have a long shadow over the canyon when the
Right.
sun hits it. And then with the evening, you have an early evening because the long shadow from the west wall brings deep shadow over you. So we wanted to get out of there before complete dark because it's very hard to see in the thickets that we had to crawl through to get out. And so we packed up our gear, and I told Alexander, let's not go on the dry wash. Let's go up on through the thicket because there's a spot where the Anasazi over 800 years ago had put two very big stone circles on the ground. And I wanted to pass through those in the dark and maybe even get photographs of them before complete dark, if we could get to them before complete dark. So we left the dry wash, and we get to this thicket, and we're going through the thicket, and by this time it was very dark, you could see the stars, and I'm walking about 8 paces ahead of Alexandra, and I thought I could see somebody running through the thicket from my right to left, so from west to east. So I thought, there's no way there's anybody in here, especially running, because you can't run through this thicket. I'm not seeing somebody. It's just, I'm tired. I'm not seeing anybody, so I didn't turn to Alexandra to say, hey, there's somebody else in here. I just kept quiet, and we got roughly to where where I saw this person disappear, and there's the stone circles that I wanted to see. And I turned to Alexandra and I said, do you think you can still get photographs of these even though it's dark? And she said, yeah, I've got the flash. She was tired. She didn't want to do it, so she begrudgingly pulled out her camera, turned it on. She was facing west, in the direction where I last saw this individual appear to disappear. She took the first photograph, took the second photograph, and almost in cue with the third photograph, a rifle went off right behind us in the dry wash, right behind us. There was a very steep embankment that was probably about 50 feet deep. It was forested. There's big trees on it. And the rifle shot was from a 5.56 rifle that was suppressed. We had both, on many occasions, fired the M4 carbine suppressed. And we're very familiar with the sound of the suppressed 5.56 rifle, and that's what we heard. And of course, in the movies, when a 5.56 rifle is suppressed, it doesn't sound very loud, but it's actually still extremely loud, especially when you're in a narrow canyon with high canyon rock walls.
Right.
It startled us both so badly, we both jumped up in the air. I broke into a cold sweat. And I was looking at her, and her eyes were just as big as mine. She said, that was a gun. And I said, yeah, it was. And we both said, let's get out of here. So we started running, and we could hear deer, which had also kicked up, and the deer were stomping and snorting as we were running away from that area. And we ran the entire way back to the top of the resort that's in the canyon. We were all scratched up because there's no trail. We're running through this thicket. And we didn't stop running until we got to the car. And I remember looking in the mirror inside the car, and my face was beet red, and the veins in my temple were hot. I was so scared. It's the first time that anything like that had ever happened to us. Somebody had definitely taken a shot, but I had shot competitively when I was younger, and I'm familiar with the sound of when a rifle's fired in the ground, when it's fired perpendicular, it's fired at you, and whoever it was definitely shot into the ground behind us. It wasn't shot at us, but they were close enough that it scared me. I wasn't gonna stay around and call out to them or try to ask out in the dark if somebody was shooting at us. I wanted to get out of there. They clearly didn't want us there. And so when we got back and we were riding home, I told Alexandra, I thought I saw somebody in the same area where the shot rang out. I thought I saw somebody. And she said, why didn't you tell me? And I said, because I was sure, that's so remote, I was sure there was nobody in there. I was sure my eyes were tired, and in the second and a half when I thought I saw somebody running, I was sure that it was my tired mind playing tricks on me. But obviously it wasn't. There was somebody in there. And all I can figure is, in correlation with the other stories of witnesses we've met and witnesses that Tom Dongo's interviewed, is it seems at night, after certain hours and into the wee hours, whenever the paramilitary contractors are deployed from these underground facilities to keep people from getting near them when testing is going on, they deploy into the canyons where somebody might be in range to see or witness some of the testing that's going on with some of the aircraft they're putting in the air. And these security teams, which I was able to confirm with the whistleblower I told you about earlier, they deploy at night, and when there's testing going on, they deploy, just as we suspected, into dirt paths, into areas where there's a perspective looking into an area where these craft are deploying from so that they can't be seen. And the security teams will stay there until the testing is done, and after the testing is over, they then go back to their base of operations. And so all the people that had been encountering over the years these paramilitary contractor types who look like military, but they aren't actually military, they're private security, in the rear of the canyons, you'll hear more or less the same encounters where somebody's walking along in the dark, and then somebody, they saw little laser points on their chest, and as they noticed that, somebody called out to them to halt, don't move, you can't come this way, this is a government operation, this is government property, turn around, get back to where you came. And we'd heard enough witnesses ourselves, and so did Tom, to know that it's usually at night, and these people are blocking hikers or campers from coming into these areas at night for some reason. So yeah, it doesn't take too much thought to think, okay, these guys are deployed at night. They appear to be military, because in some cases they're wearing helmets, people that are close enough to see them in a little bit of light, see that they're wearing camouflage uniforms. Sometimes they're wearing coveralls. Sometimes they're wearing body armor. Sometimes they don't have firearms. And in this particular case, we didn't see who pulled the trigger on the rifle. We just knew that somebody was in there shooting. I saw one person who appeared to be silhouetted and dressed in black. I didn't see them well enough to know what exactly they're wearing, if they were armed or whatnot. But hearing the gunshot, it's safe to assume that there was more than one there. And I told her I was there later when we were just spouting conjecture on what happened. I told her maybe we were on the inside of one of these security lines that's deployed in the canyons, and because perhaps they didn't know we were in there, and we came up behind them, and we compromised one of the men who was strung out in a security line inside the canyon, and he saw us coming and he ran for cover. He probably went to ground somewhere. As it was, he was hoping we would probably just walk by and leave the area so they wouldn't have to say anything to us. As it was, bad luck for him and bad luck for us, we happened to stop in the relative area where he was probably gone to ground, and we started taking photographs with a flash. And I can only, again, it's just conjecture on my part, I can only assume that he probably was on his radio in the earpiece saying, these people are taking photographs, get them off me. And some of the team that was behind us probably figured, well, let's just shoot off around and make them run away. Which it worked. They fired around and it scared the bejesus out of us, and we ran for it. And so our encounter was a little different than some of the other encounters that some people have. Most people will have a rather terse verbal confrontation with these people, and they're ordered to leave. In our case, we had no verbal confrontation. They just fired around into the embankment, which was enough to scare us away. It worked, and we didn't need anybody to tell us to leave. We were scared enough to go. But we met another witness, a woman named Barbie, who told us that she was going to Bradshaw Ranch one night with a friend of hers. And I think she said her friend was from out of town, and she wanted to take her out to Bradshaw Ranch. And they were going out at 1 o'clock in the morning. And they were going down Boynton Pass Road, which is, when you get to Boynton Pass Road, you're approximately 4 miles from Bradshaw Ranch. And as they turned onto Boynton Pass Road, they had to pass Fay Canyon, which is on their right. On the left, immediately, is now a paved parking lot. It used to be just a dirt parking lot. And Fay Canyon gets scores of visitors every day. In fact, the parking lot in the middle of the day is full, and there's nowhere to park, so people will park along the road. Fay Canyon is a small canyon. It's one of the shorter canyons, and it's beautiful. It's a staggeringly gorgeous canyon. Not a canyon you'd expect something to happen. It's also a box canyon. It's a dead end. So when you reach the end of it, you simply turn around and come back to the parking lot. Well, as she was driving past Fay Canyon with her friend, they noticed that the canyon walls were lighting up. And she stopped the car, and she said to her friend, look at that. And they'd see like a square patch of light on one side of the canyon wall, and then the east wall would light up. And then that light would blink out, and the other side would, and they couldn't see the source of the light. They assumed, naturally, that the source of the light must be down in the canyon. And she looked into the parking lot, and there was not one solitary car in the parking lot. And she told her friend, hey, I know you want to see Bradshaw Ranch, but you want to stop here first and see what's causing those lights? And her friend said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So they parked in the parking lot, and she didn't have a flashlight. She was going to use her cell phone with its little flashlight feature as a flashlight. Her friend didn't have a flashlight at all, but she was apparently frightened of scorpions. So she brought one of those little black lights that you shine on the ground to make a scorpion light up so you don't step on a scorpion. So here she's walking along with her small tiny light on her cell phone, and her friend is walking along with this small black light looking for scorpions. They got a short distance into Fay Canyon, and when you go into Fay Canyon, the trees are very thick, the shrubbery very thick. You can't really see much more than maybe 10 meters once you're into the canyon. It gets a great deal of water flow when there's snow melts during the monsoon, and makes for very fertile ground in the base of the canyon. So there's very tall trees and a lot of shrubbery, and you could say a veritable thicket, if you will, in the canyon. Now, they're on the trail, which is very narrow, and they're walking along. They suddenly see a sprinkle of lights ahead of them through the trees. And they both turn off their lights, and they're standing there quietly listening, and they could hear what she said sounded like a radio. And she could hear the feedback cracking. And she said, we heard voices over the radio saying something like, Tier 1 personality is approaching, Tier 1 personality is approaching. And she said, we sit there quietly listening. Then all the lights turned off at once, and the radio went silent too. And she said, I turned to my friend, and I said, do you want to keep going? And she said, yeah, let's go. She said, I turned on my light again. She turned on her black light again. And she said, we didn't go that much farther. And the trail curved slightly in a very large bush on our left. And as they came up on the bush, they were literally abreast of the bush where they could reach out and touch it. The bush shook, and two men stood up out of the bush. And she only saw them briefly, but they were almost face to face. And she said the two men were dressed in camouflage. They both had rifles slung across their chests. And she said their faces were painted black. And one man had something that looked like a very large radio antenna sticking up off of his back. She said the eeriest thing, which she'll never forget, she said they both were tilting their heads sideways, like a dog that hears a sound that confuses it, and you see the dog tilt his head sideways out of confusion. She said they both had their heads tilted sideways and were looking at us with very big eyes. And she said, I screamed and dropped my phone. My friend screamed, and we both almost rolled over each other trying to run away. And they ran back down the trail toward the direction of the parking lot, and they never stopped running, nor did they ever leave the trail. She said we stayed on the trail. We didn't stop for a breath. We didn't stop to talk. We ran in a panic all the way back to my car. It's just that I was very conscious of the fact that I dropped my phone, and I did not care because I was so scared. She said when I got to my car, and I was scrambling for my keys to open my car, she said I was almost directly eye line of sight with my eye level with the roof of my car. She said sitting on top of my car, right over my driver's side door, was my phone. I said, hang on a second, you're talking about the phone you just dropped. And she said, yes. And I said, so you weren't running that fast then, because one of these men recovered your phone and obviously made it to there to put your phone in the car. And she said, no. There's no way that somebody could have run faster than we were running and got to my car and put my phone on top of the car. She said, I was so scared, I grabbed my phone, we got in the car, and she said we did not go to Bradshaw Ranch. We both went back into town, and I took my friend back to my place. And she was terrified. Even when she was recounting that story to me, she was very scared and not even looking forward to ever going past Bay Canyon again. And I said, you know, Barbie, that's very strange because I've never heard of anything like that, especially in Fay Canyon. Fay Canyon's a very small canyon. When you hear of people encountering the military types, it's usually in Secret Canyon, Long Canyon, or Boynton Canyon, and even Lloyd Canyon. Those are usually the four canyons where you hear people having these encounters. But I'd never heard until that time somebody say that in Fay Canyon they had that encounter. And even more so, she wasn't even that far into the canyon when she ran into these guys. And I said, Barbie, what do you think they were doing? She said, I have no idea. I just know there must have been a lot of them. Because when we first stopped, she said there were these little sprinkles of lights throughout the forest from one side of the canyon to the other. And that's what stopped us. She said we didn't know what to make of it. And then we heard the crackle of the radio. She said that got our curiosity piqued even more. She said initially we just saw entire large patches of the canyon wall lighting up in squares. And that's what got our attention. Now that also caught Alexander's attention and mine. Because on seven different occasions, we saw square patches of light light up not only in canyon walls, but also just outside of Bradshaw Ranch, the hills that surround Bradshaw Ranch on, I want to say, is it three occasions? We placed it the hills? It was about 3 occasions, maybe 4. And we were lucky, too, that we had friends with us on one of the occasions when we saw it. But it was a clear sky. You could see the stars at night. And something from skyward managed to light up a very large patch, maybe 100 to 200 square feet of a square patch of desert or the hill on the west side of Bradshaw Ranch lit up. And we all gasped and were looking toward this lit up square patch, and we were looking up in the sky. Where is this light coming from? It was only on for a second or two. It blinked out, and then immediately to the north of that, another section, a square section of equal size, lit up. That one blinked out. Then immediately again to the north of the second patch of light that lit up, another light lit up. And it was almost like something in the sky that we couldn't see was scanning the desert on the west side of Bradshaw Ranch. And we were stunned. We didn't know what to make of it. And in the years from the first time we had seen that, we've actually seen it again. Well, there's another very nice man who's actually been involved in investigating the Bradshaw Ranch in the area much longer than I have. His name is Tony Rouland. And Tony Rouland recently published a book on his findings in the Sedona area and Bradshaw Ranch. And that book is now on the market, which I read. And I was so impressed with his book, I was going to reach out to him. And it was so strange. This is a very Sedona-like moment. Before I reached out to him, he sent me a message and said, hey, I've been wanting to talk to you. I understand you're investigating the area. And we started trading stories and so on. And I was very, very anxious to talk to him. Because one of the things that he spoke of in encountering in his book, when he was visiting Bradshaw Ranch with 2 other very seasoned investigators who had been investigating the Skinwalker Ranch, was what he described as rectangular patches of light lighting up the cliffs to the north of Bradshaw Ranch. And there's even a sketch in his book of the lights as they saw them. And so I was telling him that we had not only seen those just like he had seen them, but we had seen them a total of 7 times. And so the 2 of us were just throwing conjecture on what we think they were. And long story short, we have no idea what's doing it. We have no idea where the source of the light is coming from. But it was a good validation for him and for me to see that other people, seasoned researchers, were seeing them. And it was also pleasant to hear that even this young witness, Barbie, who had her terrible encounter with these paramilitary types in Fay Canyon, what initially took her into the canyon, was seeing the exact same phenomena of these square patches of light lighting up the canyon walls on both sides. And she described it as it would light up one side, and then that would wink out, it would light up the other. On one of the other occasions when Alexander and I had witnessed those same lights was on a winter night. We had gone into Hartwell Canyon, which is actually technically blocked off to the public. There's a government fence across the front of the canyon. And we had crossed over the fence and gone deep into the canyon. It got dark, and when we were coming back out, a snowstorm was beginning. And so it was pitch black. There was no starlight because there were heavy clouds coming right over the canyon walls. And snow started coming down. And we were just getting past the abandoned ranch house at the mouth of the canyon, right before the fences. And I remember looking over my shoulder behind me, and I saw a very large square patch of the sheer canyon wall on the east side lit up. And it scared me because I knew there was nobody behind us. Number one, the canyon is blocked off to the public. There's a government fence across it. Number two, we had just come from that area. There was nobody else in there. And so I grabbed Alexander's shoulder and I said, look. And she turned around with me and was looking at the light just as it winked out. And as it winked out, a square patch of equal size and scale showed up on the west wall. And so we stood there watching this pattern of the west one would blink out, and then another square patch would light up on the right side. And I think it did it like 5 times, switching sides. After it winked out again, we decided that's creepy, let's get out of here. So we walked out down the lane, and we went to go over the gate, which isn't the same way we came in. We were to slip through a hole in the fence In this particular case, we were so hasty to get out because it was much more dark and there was a storm coming. We figured we'll just take our chances and go right over the gate. And when we got to the gate, it's one of those old aluminum farm gates that makes just a devil of a noise when you're climbing over it. It clangs and makes terrible noise, and there's also padlocks and chains hanging up over it, which made even more noise. And so we just made a terrible noise as we were climbing over it, and we hastened our pace. Once we got over the fence, we started almost jogging to get away from the place in case there was somebody there. And I think we got about 20 paces beyond the fence, and our hair stood on end because we heard the sound of somebody else climbing over the gate behind us. And we both spun around and turned on our flashlights and shined it right at the gate. And we're looking at the gate. The gate is completely illuminated by her flashlight and mine. And we're hearing the sound of somebody climbing over it. We're hearing the padlocks banging up against the fence. We're hearing the sound of this aluminum bending as somebody's climbing over it. And we can't see anybody. There's nothing there. We're looking at it, we're hearing it, but there's nothing there. So it stopped, the sound stopped, and we both turned off our flashlights, and at that point I think we bolted the rest of the way down the lane, and we didn't stop running until we got to the car.
Wow, this is a whole new brand of high strange here, all these stories. Wow,
That whole area, Brent, is so strange. So the Bradshaw Ranch, because of Linda Bradshaw and Tom Donegal, bless them for being willing to be outside, because by day there wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on. Now that's not to say there wasn't stuff, because the paranormal stuff happens during the day too, but it always peaks in the whole area at night, as does the paranormal or the paramilitary activity as well. So because of Linda Bradshaw being a nature enthusiast, she was not the kind of person that wanted to sit inside and watch TV. Now Bob Bradshaw, when he was done with all of his ranch work, that's exactly what he wanted to do. He would sit inside and sit down with a drink. He was not a drinking man. He wouldn't drink alcoholic beverages. I'm told he even avoided coffee. He didn't smoke cigarettes, even though he was the very first Marlboro man ever photographed. When Marlboro was looking to have a really rough, manly man on horseback to be their first Marlboro man to put on the back of a magazine, the photographer that was tasked with finding someone was told he needed to talk to Bob Bradshaw. He's a man outside of Sedona, Arizona, who had the best backdrop you could ever hope for, and he's the real deal. He's an actual cowboy, but he doesn't smoke. And so they approached him, and they said, would you be willing to be our man? And he said, I can pretend to smoke, and he winked at them. So they got their first photograph of the first Marlboro man, which happened to be Bob Bradshaw, a non-smoker. They took that photograph and laid on his property. And so he would joke about that in the years after that. He said, I'm a good actor. I can pretend to smoke, and he would say it with a wink. But he was a very clean-natured man, very healthy. He didn't believe in smoking. When he was very young, I think he was 15 years old, living in Ohio, he and some of his playmates came across an alcoholic who had fallen asleep on railroad tracks. And the train had come along and completely dismembered the body of this inebriated man.
Oh, wow.
And unfortunately, as a young man, I think he was in his teens, as a young man seeing this, and then finding out it was the town drunk, he was so horrified, so traumatized by what he saw, that to himself he swore on that he would never touch alcohol, and he never did. He stayed true to his word. He never touched a drop of liquor. Like I said, he didn't smoke, and I'm told he didn't even drink coffee. But the one thing he did like to do at night when he was done working on his ranch was to sit inside and watch TV. So he was not a man that liked to go out at night unless he had to, where his second wife, who was Linda, did like to. She liked to go outside, and she liked the cool breeze that comes through the desert at night from the canyons, the sound of the owls hooting at night. She just liked to be outside. And because she did, that's how she experienced the first set of orbs that she saw flying over her property. And she was determined that she was going to catch them for posterity with her camera. So she got a really good camera. She got really good film. Bob himself was a professional photographer who had a photography shop in Sedona. And so she knew what she was doing. And she caught her first photographs of orbs. And from that point on, she made a point of being outside more. And that's when more and more paranormal stuff, even more incredible stuff than just the orbs, started happening. And that's when she reached out to Tom Dongo, and Tom started his investigation side by side with her. And thanks to both of them doing the groundwork, the book Merging Dimensions, which I believe the first 60 pages, approximately the first 60 pages are Linda's account, and then the remainder of the book is Tom's investigation about the Bradshaw Ranch. And it's caused, especially recently, a massive wave of thrill seekers and curiosity seekers and amateur investigators and influencers and YouTubers to come out there and visit the ranch. But the main point being is the ranch itself is a focal point, but the paranormal activity spans the entire area. So Red Rock Country, if you will, is hundreds of miles of red rock cliffs and canyons, and then the ranch is in front of them. And the entire area is experiencing the same paranormal phenomena. So the Bigfoot creatures that we're experiencing, they're being seen on Linda Bradshaw's property, were being seen in other places too, including the ranches in front of Bear Mountain. There's a private ranch there, for example, that has a sign at the end of their lane that expresses that it's private property, they don't want people trespassing. And a fellow investigator went down their lane and knocked on their door, and they answered the door, not opening past the chain that kept the door blocked, asking this man what he was doing trespassing. He said, well, I just want a moment of your time. I'm sorry to bother you. I know you have a no trespassing sign, but I'm just curious as if you're experiencing anything out of the ordinary on your property. And the man at the door said, what do you mean by out of the ordinary? And he said, no, anything strange, anything like lights in the sky or strange things on your property. The man and the woman looked at each other, and then they looked at the fellow investigator outside the door, and they said, oh, you must be asking about that big white furry thing that goes through our trash at night. They said, no, wait, what did you see? And they said, well, there's that really giant white hairy thing that dumps our trash occasionally, and it makes our dog bark. We don't know what it is. And right away that harkens to the white-haired Bigfoot that was seen on the Bradshaw property over a period of time that they nicknamed Big Girl, because it was coming across their property so often that they gave it a nickname. And it had white fur. So they weren't the only ones that were seeing it. And what really struck me is there's a pictograph panel not even 2 miles north of the Bradshaw Ranch in one of the canyons. And in that pictograph panel, you see a line of Anasazi dancers. And behind the Anasazi dancers, you see 2 very large figures, giant figures. One of them looks like a giant praying mantis wearing a robe, which is another common, another one of the semi-common cryptids that's seen by people around here, including one man who saw what he described plainly as a giant praying mantis in the Secret Canyon, which he ran from. And beside that is a very blocky, stocky figure with no neck, and it's painted with white crushed bone and animal fat. And there's only a rectangle of space where its eyes would be left open to imply that there's eyes there. And it's clearly depicting a white Bigfoot. Now, the Anasazi that made that pictograph disappeared from this area 750 to 800 years ago. So that means that even that long ago, all the paranormal activity that people encounter in this area, the ancient Anasazi were seeing them too. And this activity and these cryptids made enough of an impression on them that they were committing them to the walls where the pictograph panels were. Now, the Anasazi are the ancient relatives of the Hopi. And the Hopi, of course, are still in Arizona. They're on their reservation north of Flagstaff. And unlike the Apache and other, the Yavapai Apache or the Chiricahua to the south, the White Mountains Apache, and the Navajo, the Hopi and their ancestors, the Anasazi, did not take hallucinogens when they were going into, if they were going to do pictograph panels, for instance. Whereas the Apache used to take the plant here that's toxic. It's called Datura. It has a white blossom. And it's very poisonous, but they knew how to make a tea out of it. and they would use just enough of it that they could drink it, and it would put them in a semi-lucid state, and they would have visions. And they would do some of their artwork or their painting on their shields as they were having visions from that. And as I'm told, and as I've read, the Anasazi didn't do that, nor did the Hopi. The Hopi are very lucid when they're doing ceremony, and they do not use hallucinogens in a ceremonial way. So with that said, a lot of the pictograph panels in this area that show things like cryptids, such as the white Bigfoot or the giant praying mantis, and we've seen, between Allegan and myself, over 300 cliff dwellings in the area, and hundreds upon hundreds of the pictograph panels, which we've photographed and studied very closely. We've seen at least 5 references to what look like giant praying mantis, and several depictions of UFOs on the cliff walls around here. They very clearly were experiencing these things and feeling it pertinent enough to commit it to pictographs on the walls. And so we've been photo documenting them. In fact, when my dear friend Connie Willis from Coast to Coast AM was doing one of her creepy hotspots shows, she decided to bring her show to the Bradshaw Ranch. And so she came out here for, I think it was approximately a week, and she did her creepy hotspot show here, and we took her to Bradshaw Ranch, and we wanted her to see some of the pictograph panels that proves that the ancient Anasazi were seeing a lot of the same paranormal activity that people see even as recently as today. And so we were able to take her to several of the pictograph panels which depict these same beings, so she could see it for herself. But it's a much more, the whole saga, if you will, of the science fiction story that makes up the plethora of activity here in the Sedona area is so widespread and so old that it clearly goes back beyond 700, 800, and even over 1,000 years, because that's the age of a lot of the pictograph panels and the Anasazi dwellings that are here. So that then harkens the question, what is it about the Sedona area? What is it about the Red Rock Canyons that brings this incredible, about a very active paranormal activity to one area? And I've been to other areas where there's in the world where there's paranormal activity, but coming home to Sedona, it still wows me for its beauty first and foremost, but also because of the incredible repetitive nature of the paranormal activity that's here. But the caveat to that is a lot of people will come on vacation expecting, well, if it's that active, I'm going to see something when I go there. And unfortunately, it's not that easy. There's some people are lucky when they'll come here and they'll see something on their first night out. But for Alexander and myself, what it took was and still takes, is going out once or twice a week and sitting out, sometimes in miserable conditions. Either it's miserable heat with clouds, mosquitoes, or it's frigid cold with ice and snow. But it always pays off in dividends by being patient. If you're outside long enough in the Sedona area, looking up, and in some cases looking down, you're going to encounter something. And that's what's kept us going outside now for 12 years, once or twice a week, specifically to Bradshaw Ranch and then some of the surrounding areas. Most recently, we've been spending a great deal of our time in the Sycamore Basin. And that's kind of an offshoot of the activity around here, is investigating these, what appear to be contracted companies by the government on the black budget that appear to be doing reverse engineering of probably alien craft and testing that craft at night from the Sycamore Basin area. And so that's been a great focus lately for us, and also a number of the other investigators in the area, as well as some of the foreign investigators who've been coming out and doing investigations. But somehow, some way, I still think it all ties in together. And again, I'm going to be reaching out on a science fiction branch here, so bear with me. But one of the things that I think caused the federal government to seize a lot of the ranches, or at least 5 of the ranches specifically, including the Bradshaw Ranch, is the presence of portal sites on the property. And Tom Dongo had said that there are hundreds of portals in the Sedona area, in the canyons and the surrounding areas. And I've come to agree with him on that. And I think, in particular, if these portals are, obviously not controlled by humankind, but they're controlled by other entities who seem to be able to use them as gateways from their realm into ours, that if you were a government agency, for example, and you were tasked with the security, specifically the national security of your country, what more of a threatening Trojan horse, if you will, could you have inside your country than to have a set of canyons in a rural desert area that has portal sites where very tangible, very solid, very technologically advanced beings, very technologically advanced vehicles are coming through at will and then leaving at will, and you have no control over it. So all that you could do, ostensibly, is to seize those properties where these portal sites are, put fences up, make sure that nobody can get in there, and then monitor the sites closely. Now, if there's some type of very highly advanced vehicles coming through them, naturally in the defense realm, that technology, if it could be seized or captured, would be very valuable to the R&D, or research and development branches of our government and of our military. And supposedly, there are means of which to incapacitate these types of craft that our government has devised. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when I was talking to some of the other investigators around here when we were theorizing on these possibilities, is that if you did manage to secure these properties with portal sites on them, and you had a quick reactionary force there to intercept things that come through them, whether it be just beings, as they've seen on the portal sites at Skinwalker Ranch. They've had beings and spacecraft come through the portals, just like the ones that are here. If there's beings coming through, naturally you'd want a biological capture and recovery team nearby that could capture or incapacitate a cryptid that comes through these portal sites. And then you'd want a site very close by that's a biological research facility where you wouldn't have to travel too far. First of all, if the being has been terminated when you capture it, and if it's going to deteriorate quickly, you don't want to have to transport it across a long distance. You want to take it to a nearby facility that the public doesn't know about. What better place to do that than an underground facility nearby, such as the underground facilities that we know are under the Sycamore Basin now. So that would also include technology. So if you were to incapacitate, let's say a 30 or 50 or even an 80-foot diameter disc, ostensibly, that comes through one of these portal sites, and you were able to incapacitate it immediately when it comes through the portal site, then naturally you'd have a recovery team that is trained to recover the craft without damaging it, recover it safely, make certain, first of all, that it's not giving off radiation, it's not giving off gas, it's not contaminated, all these things that they would have to check it for and quarantine it. And then you, again, the same with the biological entities, you wouldn't want to have to transport them across a long distance. Number one, for security reasons. How do you hide a 30-foot, 50-foot, or an even 80-foot disc if you're driving it across the desert? Somebody's going to see it. So you'd want to have your research facilities and your R&D facility as close by, so if the vehicle is not compromised by civilians who see it en route. So again, it makes sense to have a multitude of underground facilities nearby, such as the ones in the Sycamore Basin, to take whatever comes through these very active portal sites, be it technology, be it an advanced race of beings, or even a simple cryptid, such as a Bigfoot or something else that may be considered simple-minded. Now, I don't think the Bigfoot themselves are simple-minded. I think they're actually very intelligent. I also think that they have the ability to dematerialize at will. I think they can actually cloak themselves so you can't see them. I think they're much more intelligent than a lot of books and authors give them credit for being. But I also believe that they are very, very directly tied into the portal sites here in the Sedona area. And the reason I not only believe that, I'm now sure of it, is we've had witnesses who have seen them coming out of portal sites. Now, one of the properties that's a hot spot, and I'm certain that there's not just one, but two portals on, is very heavily guarded. And this is not the Bradshaw Ranch. It's another property that's not too far away from it. And the property was seized roughly around the same time that the Bradshaw Ranch was seized, maybe a little bit before. And it's a smaller property, and the Bradshaws knew it was there. The Bradshaws mentioned, in fact, I think Linda mentioned in her portion of the book that they suspected that there was a ranch a short distance away that had an entrance to a military underground base. I was curious when I read that because she doesn't mention where. She just mentions a short distance away. And it didn't take too long with Alexander and I wandering around the desert to figure out which one it was, because there was a place that was very heavily guarded, even though it's virtually right under the public's noses, and it has not one but four fences that surround the perimeter of the place. But again, the public goes right by it and have no idea that it's there. And there was a man who lived on the edge of that property. He built his own home, and he was telling all of his friends. He was a very intelligent man. He was an engineer by trade, and he retired. He was telling his friends, there's a portal that opens up on my property, and he said these big hairy things come out of it when it's open. He said I also see them standing there, and they go into it when it opens. And I think a lot of his friends were thinking, well, he's like a lot of very eccentric, intelligent people. As he grows older, he's just getting a little loopy. So his friends weren't believing what he was saying. And he was saying over and over again, there's a portal on my property. Well, after his property was seized, this man moved to Cottonwood. And this particular witness has since passed away. But he insisted to his friends, right up to when he passed away, that on that property that he owned, not too far from the Bradshaw Ranch, there was a portal. And at that portal site, he had seen two Bigfoot appear to be, and I'm using his words, the two Bigfoot appeared to be guarding the portal when it was open. So there was another account, completely unrelated to his exact property and this man himself, that really caught my eye. Now, I didn't talk to these two ladies myself, but I found their account. There were two women that worked for the local Century 21 agency, the real estate agency, and they sold a parcel of land that was not too far from this man's parcel of land. It was a relatively flat ranch with one building on it, and the rest of it was just desert scrub on it, except on one end of the property, on the east end of the property, there was a red rock hill that was bald on top. And these two ladies, when they were out there, they had just sealed the deal and sold the property, but they wanted to send some photographs of the entire property from that hill to the individual who bought the property. So they said, well, let's go over to that hill over there, and we'll get some really good pictures of the whole sprawling property, including the house. So the two of them walk over there in their nice clothes and their high heels, and they climb up this red rock precipice. It's a relatively steep hill, and since then I found out which one it is. They get to the top of the hill. It's a very narrow hill, and as they both get to the top, they're looking down the far side, on the other side of it, and they saw, and this is in broad daylight, what they described as two Bigfoot creatures with very big eyes staring at them. And they both scream. They throw their papers in the air, they drop their bags, and they both go running down the far side of the hill, back across the property to their car, and they race to town. And they get to, by the way the account goes, they get to the police department, and they run into the desk officer, and they start rambling away. They're crying because they're so scared. To the desk officer about having seen two monsters at the property they're selling, and they want somebody to go out and see this. And the man listens patiently to them and says, ladies, here's a card for the Yavapai Sheriff's County Department. You have to call them. That's outside of our jurisdiction. It's not within the Sedona city limits. So we would like to check that out for you, but we can't. So you'll have to call the Sheriff's Department, which they did. So they called the Sheriff's Department, and the Sheriff's deputy came and patiently listened to the two ladies, still hysterical, recount what they saw. And he says, well, okay, ladies, I'm going to have you get in the car, and I'll follow you out there, and I want you to show me exactly where this happened. And both of them utterly refused. They said, there's absolutely no way that I'm going back out there. We gave you the address. You can go and look at it yourself. He said, well, ladies, I'd really like to make an official report of this, but I don't even know exactly where this hill is that you speak of on the property. It would really be a great deal of help to me if you come out to continue your story by showing me exactly where this happened. And after a little bit of prompting, he was able to talk one of the ladies into going back out with him on the condition that she would not get out of his car. She said she would point to the hill from the car, but she refused to get out of the car. So he drove her back out there. She points to the hill where this happened. He said, will you wait here? You can go ahead and lock the door. I'm going to go up there and look around, and I'll be right back. So the deputy goes up to the top of the hill. He looks over the far side, and he can see their papers. So their papers are dropped right where she said that they both screamed, and they dropped all their papers. He looks over the far side. He doesn't see two black hairy creatures with big eyes. And he picks up all the papers. He looks for tracks. He doesn't see footprints. He doesn't see broken branches, nothing. So he comes back to the car, and he says, ma'am, I didn't see anything, but I do believe you. He hands her the papers and gives them back. He says, is there any other detail that you can give me? And she said, well, I guess the only thing I would add is it looked like they were guarding something. It looked like they were not going to move. If we had taken a step to them, she said, I don't think they would have moved. They appeared to be guarding something behind them, like they didn't want us to go past where they were. And that's where that account struck me, because guarding is the same word that the man who built his own home on a property not too far from there, he used to describe when the portal would appear on his property at night. He said these Bigfoot creatures appeared to be guarding it when it opened, and they appeared to be guarding it when they were waiting, or guarding the site when they were waiting for it to open. And what he described was a small white patch that would open up, and it looked like circles of lines on the inside, spiral lines. And that's more or less what some of the witnesses that had seen this on the Skinwalker Ranch had also reported. They were a bit more vivid in one of the accounts where they actually saw a large bipedal hairy creature crawl out of the portal and stand up on its legs into the bipedal position and then scamper off into the forest after it stood up. And so that's another phenomenon that's in the Sedona area. And I think it's probably the key phenomenon. I think the portals is what it comes down to. I think the portals are one of the focal points of a lot of the paranormal activity. So the orbs, which are the most common phenomenon people see here, I think those are sentient beings. I know they're intelligent because by the suggestion of Tom Dongo, he said, you've got some great photographs of orbs, but I've seen hundreds of orb photos. He said, why don't you try talking to them? And I said to Tom, what do you mean? He said, they're relatively intelligent. He said, they're not extremely intelligent. He said, but they're like a smart dog. You can ask them to do simple things, and they'll do them. He said, just try it. So when I went back out there with our cameras, I found a spot where I had been very successful in capturing orb photographs. And a lot of people will say, well, they're moisture molecules, they're dust, and trust me, we've already tried to prove that they were dust. We've tried to prove that they were moisture molecules, and they're not. They're small electromagnetic balls of light. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. They're not always there. But at Tom's suggestion, we spoke out loud. One night I caught a cloud of them, and I said, thank you. You remember we're here every week. Thank you for showing up in my photograph. I'm going to take another one from this very spot. Can you do me a favor? If you understand me, can you step out of frame, every single one of you? I'd like to take a photograph with not one of you in the frame, please. Here I go. 1, 2, 3, click. I took the photograph. I looked at the viewfinder, and there was not one orb visible. And I said, okay, wonderful. Now, I want to ask you a favor again. If you can hear me, if you can understand me, would you please be so kind as to step back in the frame? I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3, click. And I took the photograph, and sure enough, just as Tom suggested, in the third frame, again, hundreds of them showed up inside the frame of the photograph that I had just taken. And I've been able to prove that experiment over and over and over again, and then suggest it to a lot of the other investigators in the area, and they've been able to execute that same experiment with equal success. That these little orbs that will show up, and you can see them sometimes with the naked eye too. It's not just in photographs. Sometimes you can see them with the naked eye flying around. They're playful. They are relatively intelligent, and I think whatever they are, as a sentient intelligence, I think they also come through those portals. I don't know why. I don't know where they're coming from, but they are there, and they are very organic, and they seem to serve some function, some presence there, and not only at the ranch, but in the entire Sedona area. People see them here in town. I spoke to one witness online in Messenger just yesterday, who said she photographs them in her backyard all the time, and then she talks with them in her yard. And in fact, her place is walking distance from our home in West Sedona. So it's a presence that's pretty much permeates the entire Sedona area, not just the canyons, and certainly not just the Bradshaw Ranch. But I do believe the portals are the focal point. I think a lot of the activity that's here centers around and involves the portal sites. And I think the government presence here probably started with the portal sites, because if there is anything that you could describe as a most poignant of all national security threats, it's not so much another human threat coming across a border or coming up on your shores. A more unpredictable threat would be a threat that is so far advanced in technology that they're 100,000, 200,000, or a million years advanced in technology, and that they're able to use these natural portal sites at will.
Yeah, they wouldn't be.
When they want to.
They wouldn't be just dropping out of the sky. They would be right here, you know, appearing from another dimension or whatever.
Exactly. There's something more to it. And you know, I harken back to another story that connects in a very strange way to the whole saga of Sedona phenomena, which happened actually in 1980. Not even probably a half hour from where Alexander was born in the United Kingdom, in Suffolk. And that's the famous Rendlesham Air Force incident, where the RAF Bentwaters base in 1980, which was rumored at that time to be a nuclear base, where they had, and I think that's now been declassified. There were two very high priority nuclear Air Force bases. One of them was in Atsugi in Japan, which was putting bombers in the air, which were on alert 24 hours. And those bombers, if alerted to make first strike, would fly from Atsugi over any point in the eastern portion of the USSR. And then the ones in Bentwaters would cover Western Europe and then the western portion of the USSR. And so we have these two high priority nuclear bases. And in 1980, the one in Bentwaters was a twin base. There were two bases there. And in between the bases was a forest called Rendlesham Forest. And on two nights consecutively, right after Christmas in 1980, the base was visited by a number of lights. And one of those lights had landed in Rendlesham Forest and was actually touched. It was a triangular-shaped craft that was touched by Jim Burroughs and Sergeant Peniston of the U.S. Air Force, both career men in the U.S. Air Force. And they saw what looked like hieroglyphic writing on the craft. It wasn't very big. It landed on a tripod. It left indentations in the ground, which showed that it was very heavy. The craft must have weighed several tons. And they both watched it lift off and take off again. But both having touched it, they both later described having dreams or nightmares of zeros and ones. And I can't remember if it was both of them having had the dream. I read about this a while ago, if it was just Mr. Peniston. But I know Mr. Peniston was one of the ones that was having this reoccurring dream of zeros and ones. And he was having the zeros and ones show up in his dream so much he would wake up in a sweat. And I think if I remember the story correctly, I hope I'm remembering the story correctly, his wife at one point was so tired of waking up with him, she said, "Are you having that dream of the zeros and ones again?" And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "You know, that's probably something important. That's probably has something to do with what you saw when you were in England. Why don't you go and tell the Air Force about that?" So he did. He went and reported to the Air Force. I think he was detained for 48 hours when he was interrogated by Air Force intelligence, the Air Force Forest Office of Special Investigation interrogated him, and then other intelligence agencies interrogated him about the zeros and ones. And he had written them down in a notebook, and he also made sketches of the symbols he saw. So many, many, many years later, when they decided to declassify some, not all, of what would become known as the Rendlesham Forest Code, there was a message. Some of it was redacted, and part of the message were a set of, was it 7 or 6, latitude and longitudes. I think it was 6 latitudes and longitudes. And those latitude and longitudes were very specific, at specific points on the planet. And only one of them was in North America. And the one that lands in North America is Sedona, Arizona, specifically at a site, according to the published coordinate, a site that is outside of town in a dry wash in a place called Turkey Creek. And Alexander, I know where the site is. There's actually nothing there. Some other investigators went out there, and they believe that the cliff wall shows where there's what looks like a door, or maybe it's a portal or something in the door. And I don't think that's, in fact, I know that's not the site. The site that the coordinates are referring to, they altered the coordinates when they published them. And the actual coordinates are on a different latitude, 4 miles away, closer to the canyons, closer to the Bradshaw Ranch area. And I'm quite certain that it's actually on one of those government properties where the portals are. And, one moment. 7. Okay. Alexander just correct me. It's 7 latitudes and longitudes that were given in what's now called the Rendlesham Code. And the Rendlesham Code has a very brief and somewhat cryptic message, starting off for the eyes of your eyes only, which some people believe is referring to like the third eye, or the sixth sense, or telepathy. And as so many people have come to know, a lot of the extraterrestrials will communicate with telepathy. They don't open their mouth, they don't use vocal cords. You hear their voices in your mind. And it seems like the beginning of that message is hinting, possibly, at somebody communicating with telepathy. And there's a very brief and somewhat broken message, some of it redacted, but the 7 coordinates, one of them is High Brazil, which is a now non-existent island off the coast of Western Ireland that was, in legend, believed to be very magical, and the origins of some of the Pictish people. The other ones, when Alexander and I were researching it, for instance, the one in China, it references a mountain in China, and that mountain has a origin story of the people that are indigenous to that area, the Chinese people, that they were all, I can't remember the exact pretext of story, because it was a while ago when I read it, but they were all brought to this planet on that exact spot. And to this day, in China, the place where this coordinate is given, people see UFOs. They see UFOs going into the mountain, coming out of the mountain, orbs, cryptids, portals, all the same phenomena that's seen here in the canyons area. Now, one of the other places, for example, is in Greece. And so I think there's one in Karachi, Belize. The Pyramid of Giza is one of the coordinates. Nazca Line in Peru. The Tai Shan Ku Mountain is the one in China. Alexander just brought this up on live to read, so I can remember it. And then the one I was just telling you about is it's literally called the Portara Temple of Apollo, or Portal of Apollo, in Naxos, Greece. That area is also very commonly seeing UFOs, cryptids, orbs, and portal activity. So it seems that all these places mentioned in the Rendlesham Code have something in common. Chief among those things, that they're known portal sites, and also that they see a lot of the same phenomena that people encounter here in Sedona. Now, in the Rendlesham Code, the only place referenced in North America, again, is the Sedona, Arizona area. And I'm very, very certain that when they declassified those documents and then redacted them, I'm very certain that they altered the latitude and longitude slightly so that they're referring to a spot outside of town that if somebody's looking into it, it will draw them to a decoy site and not to the portal sites which the government has fenced off and seized and keeps people away from. I'm very, very certain that the actual coordinates, as they were actually, what would you call it, they were interpreted out of the simple binary code, originally referred to an area that's not too far from the Bradshaw Ranch where there's 2 portal sites. And those 2 portal sites are extremely active. And the road that goes into that area that is a government site, at one point, several years ago, it was blocked off and the road was closed. And they kept it blocked off for a year and a half. And there's absolutely nothing down that road. And Alexander and I were trying to find out what was the reason for blocking off the road. And the U.S. Forest Service had said that the road was blocked for hazardous road conditions. And that made us laugh because there's no dry wash, there's no bridge, there's no, there's nothing. There's nothing but a flat road going into a government site, a federally owned site. And so we realized it's because the portal sites were that active at that time that they simply blocked off the road, made a simple reason to keep people from coming anywhere near it, and they probably had their quick reactionary teams down there to intercept whatever came through the portal. So if it was technology coming through, they were there to intercept it and document it. If it was cryptids coming through, they were there to intercept and document it. And I think that's probably why these very large and well-funded, black-budget private companies are under the Sycamore Basin to this day and are very active. Because it seems logical that if you have a site where it's very active, where technology, off-road technology that's very advanced is coming through, or biological entities, which could also be valuable in the terms of the defense realm.
Well,
You'd want to capture them and study them, and if you could, reverse engineer them. But you'd want to do it as close as possible to where they're intercepted. And so it makes sense that in the Sycamore Basin that there is underground facilities where privately contracted companies, the best in their realm of engineering companies and the best in their realm of biological companies are there to have these items or beings brought to them from a short distance away to study them and catalog them, and if possible, reverse engineer whatever tech is brought from them. And so it's a long shot to think that that's what is going on out there. But we do know for a fact, and for an absolute fact, that there is several facilities hidden underground in the Sycamore Basin. We do know for a fact that UAPs are rising out of there, in some cases, nightly, and multitudes of them. And literally just last Friday, like the 23 that we were telling you about, and they're seen with military helicopters. Most often it's Black Hawks. Sometimes you'll see Apache gunships as well. And none of them have tail numbers. None of them have any markings on them. And until recently, in my research, I wasn't aware that there are now private military contractor companies that actually they hire ex-military pilots, and they buy all the types of modern military hardware that we put in the air. Everything from old F-4 Phantoms from the Vietnam era up to F-15s, F-16s, F-22s. And I found a company that I probably shouldn't name on out loud, but I found a company that's operating here in Arizona that does just that. They have it's a private military contractor company, and they operate for a certain amount of funds a Air Force that can be hired, and they've got the most high-tech of military helicopters, the most high-tech of military jets, observation platforms, and they have it all. And I was just reading about that in my research about what's going on in the Sycamore Basin. And that, again, was another puzzle piece coming together because so many people talk about seeing the black helicopters over the area. And most of the pilots in the area scoff at that idea. Like, oh, you know, you've got Luke Air Force Base nearby. They're simply training. And that's not necessarily the case because when people call Luke Air Force Base when seeing these large formations of helicopters flying through the area, they're often told, nope, they're not ours. We don't have anybody flying into that area. And the limited range that a lot of these small helicopters have would make you think, okay, if it's not Luke Air Force Base, then who do they belong to? Because they have got a limited fuel range in their area of operation. So who do they belong to? Now, I did find photographs of some Black Hawk helicopters that were from Fort Bliss. They were 6th Cavalry, 3rd Battalion that had landed at the Sedona Airport. But their helicopters were marked in the traditional military sense, where you could see the crossed sabers, for instance, painted on the side of the traditional U.S. Cavalry units. And you could see the gold number 6 above it for the 6th Cavalry, and you can see the battalion designation under that. And so there are training operations that do pass through the area as well, which in a way is convenient for any paramilitary contractors who have unmarked vehicles flying in this area, because the people that don't want to believe that there's something extraordinary going on here will simply say, well, you couldn't see the tail numbers. You couldn't see the insignia on the helicopters. It's simply the military training. Don't worry about it. But yes, the military does train the area, but then there's also a much larger presence of military vehicles in the air that aren't the U.S. Air Force, they aren't the Army, they aren't the Marines. They belong to somebody else. A friend of mine was in the Clarkdale area, nearby to one of the facilities that's believed to be a very large entrance to an underground base that happens to be owned by Martin Marietta. And of course, Martin Marietta is the company that was I believe, working in conjunction with Skunkworks. And of course, those two names are renowned in the black budget realm for reverse engineered aircraft, underground military bases, and so on. And this facility in the Clarkdale area is owned by Martin Marietta. They were going by another name, but after Beyond Skinwalker aired, a lot of the local sleuths started doing their own investigating, and were able to come up with very quickly that Martin Marietta is in fact the owner of this large facility outside of Clarkdale. And that's where it's believed that one of the underground entrances to one of these facilities, or most of the facilities, happens to be. And that's confirmed. That's documented. That's owned by Martin Marietta.
Wow.
And there's another facility to the north that was recently discovered by our team to also be owned by Martin Marietta. And they also go by what would you call it, a cover name. They have a front that makes them look like a small private company, but in fact, within a few hours of researching that particular company to the north, they're also owned by Martin Marietta. So there's a lot of things that are falling into place in our research of the area that shows that the government has a very, very strong vested interest in this whole area and what's going on here. And it seems that they've made an incredible effort to bring technology into the area, to bring companies into the area that are not so much Pentagon military companies, but in the traditional sense, they are privately contracted companies who are the best in their realm, whether it be biological engineers or aeronautical engineers, or in the case of the one that was identified to me by a man who was a whistleblower who worked security for this company, they make optics. And there they are working underground out there in the Sycamore Basin. But they don't just make any optics. They make the best optics in the world for military hardware. So they make drones, for instance, that are the size of a pinky finger. And this is actually public knowledge. So if they make this and make it public knowledge, they're making a lot better stuff than what's known to the public. The drone that they make that's the size of a pinky finger can be fit in the pocket of a platoon sergeant. And when they're deployed to a hostile area where they need to do reconnaissance, instead of having to risk manpower to go over a hill, to go to the other side, the sergeant can take this small pinky-sized drone out of his pocket, deploy the booms on it, turn it on, throw it into the air, and it can be flown via satellite guidance over the hill. It can look at everything on the other side of the hill. It also has its own ground-penetrating radar. The particular company that we've identified because this whistleblower that's under the Sycamore Basin, they specialize in FLIR technology, and then they've got state-of-the-art night vision technology that is far better than anything that they've had even 5 years ago. It appears that they're testing it out there on the reverse engineered craft that another company is working on. So all these companies that are best in their realm seem to be working together out there in the Sedona Basin, ostensibly with aircraft, but I think they're working on more than just aircraft out there. I think there's probably a biological lab as well. But we do know they're putting aircraft out there. And we don't know for certain sure what type of propulsion they're using. We haven't identified that yet. The whistleblower I talked to said, you know what? He said, I saw the aircraft. He said, it just looked like your classic disc-shaped aircraft because I have no idea what propulsion it used. He said, I don't know who the pilots were. He said, in my job, you don't ask questions, or you lose your job. You don't take an extra long look or stop to look at things. He said, you just do your job and you don't say anything about it. And so when his contract ran out, of course, he and his company were under non-disclosure agreements. This particular man now is elderly, and he's moved to Thailand. And so when he was here visiting, he was actually very candid. I don't think he had planned on volunteering anything he told me about. He just happened to overhear Alexander and I talking to a few of the other people about a potential underground base, or bases in plural, under the Sycamore Basin, and he just let it in and confirmed, yeah, there's facility out there. And I said, well, how do you know that? He said, well, I work there. I provide security for 2 companies out there.
Yeah,
and that's what got the whole conversation rolling.
Yeah, that's the guy you were talking about earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, well.
So
well, I was just going to say that, gee, I know we've a little over 2.5 hours. We might have to get together again here.
Sure.
And I know you had a head cold a few days ago, and you didn't know if you were going to be able to schedule this interview with me today, but it worked out, and you sound like you're doing a lot, really well.
I've been taking I'm not much into taking decongestants and such. I like to do holistic things, and I've been drinking tea and getting to bed early and gradually getting better. It's a strange time of year. Usually a head cold doesn't go around in Arizona this time of year. Luckily, it wasn't a really strong one. It was just a irritating one where I was losing my voice and sneezing and coughing, and I'm on the downside of it now.
Okay, that's
this
good.
This is the first time I've got to talk to you. So I sound congested that you might not be able to tell because you haven't heard me talk before, but I'm a little congested now, but otherwise, luckily I haven't been coughing too much. I was worried about that. I said to Alexander, I'll feel so bad because this is the first time I've got to talk to Brent, and he's such a very kind and sweet individual. I don't want to give a terrible recording because I'm coughing and sneezing the whole time.
Well, I know people listening are going to say, well, where's Brent? But I have not, this is one of those interviews where I at no point did I feel like I needed to interrupt you because you have had such a flow of detailed information and recall and on so many different areas.
And good. I tend to ramble, so I hope I didn't ramble too much.
Well, it's fascinating. I'm sure the listeners are going to really be riveted to the content and everything that you're sharing, and it's like there's no bottom to this. And it's an
unending. It's one of those never-ending sagas. And as the deeper we look into it, luckily now it's not just Alexander and myself. We've got a good team put together of seasoned investigators that are far more seasoned than ourselves, and the foreign team that's now working. We're signed on to non-disclosure agreements with them, but after they release their information, then I can talk more about it. They were spending, I think I was telling you earlier, they spent $27,000 a day on the investigation. Their main focus is government oversight. So they're looking into black budget funded facilities underground across the Southwest. And they had, I can't really go into it, I wish I could, but once they go out, they release the information, I can tell you a lot more about it. But they've got whistleblowers straight from Washington who told them to come here. And they gave specific names of the areas of where to look. And so that's how they found Alexander and myself, because we had been investigating areas by the same name.
Okay, so they're directed from Washington, and they are foreign, but they obviously are good foreigners. I mean,
yes. And when I can actually tell you the name of these people that are investigating it, you'll know who they are, and you'll know who what their reputations are. They're straight from the top, and their main concern is government oversight, and so that's the main thing they're delving into. And I think probably what was the biggest surprise to them is that this government oversight, which is trillions upon trillions of taxpayer dollars that are disappearing into defense budget. And when the U.S. government was trying to do an audit on where this money was going, of course they were being blocked in finding out what's going. So it took whistleblowers who were upset with it, who think that the public should know about this stuff, and a very good and dedicated foreign investigative team who have made a name for themselves now, to join forces with them to start looking into it. And the amount of progress they've made against the odds is incredible. And so I'm really anxious for their investigation to finish and for them to release what they found, because the investigating they did here was just a fraction of the overall story. It's not just Sedona, Arizona. There's a large number of other underground facilities across the Southwest. I think some even in New England, and even a few outside of our country that are illegal operations, that are unconstitutional, and that's their main concern. They know that some of this is absolutely crazy stuff. That if they were to talk about what our government has been funding, what they're hiding, that's so beyond science fiction that people would simply refuse to believe it, except that it does happen to be true, and the government's spending their money, top dollar, on this subject matter. So it may be something that they don't want to believe, but the government believes it enough that they're spending most of the taxpayers' money on it, and that's what their focus is. So I'm hoping that they'll come out with it soon, because I'd like to talk with you even more in more depth about what I was able to touch on tonight in 2 hours. It's just the surface of it, Brent. It goes a lot deeper. Just to use your words, it goes a lot deeper.
Wow. Well, it seems like we've really delved quite deep already. By the way, I was wondering, not to push the conversation, because I know I've got to close this off, but and just continue later. But there's some areas as we were talking, I was thinking about. I just wanted to ask you, and if any of this relates to your area, like quartz crystals. I know Sedona is known for its crystals, and I've spoken with two different individuals who were undergoing experiences, and when they came to Sedona during this time, they said the quartz crystals were affecting them in a way that they couldn't stand being around, like going into a gift shop with crystals, being around the crystals.
Yes, absolutely. To answer your question, 100%. So this area, obviously it's a geographical oddity. The high iron oxide content, for one thing, in the ground. There's magnetite. There's a natural, very large amount of quartz crystal in the ground here. In fact, on the North Hill of Bradshaw Ranch, there's a spot on the North Hill where it looks like somebody took buckets of quartz crystal and dumped it along the ground. But it's just naturally part of the geography here. There's a lot of quartz crystal on the ground. Now, also with the lava tubes that we were speaking about earlier, and this is Ben Lone Tree's realm here. He's the electrical engineer and scientist, a good friend of mine. His study at Bradshaw Ranch has been from a scientific perspective, and more specifically, an electrical, electromagnetic, ionic, and electromagnetic perspective. So he goes down there with his instruments, and he's been taking readings of ionic releases, positive and negative, electron releases, positive and negative, and EM spikes through the ground. And he has had an incredible success rate in finding very abnormal readings at the Bradshaw Ranch. On one occasion, he had put his equipment in the ground. He makes all his own equipment. The man's a genius. And he kind of reminds me of Doc Brown from the Back to the Future movies. He's this mad scientist of a man who he's very, very sane. And it's a very clever man. It's an absolute sweetheart.
Right.
And brilliant. He's a brilliant. So he set up his equipment, and one night he got a spike coming out of the ground right between the ranch house and the adobe. That spike of EMF activity, the electromagnetic activity, was so grand that it was larger than the spike you would get from, or reading you would get from a bolt of lightning. And I saw the video of him. I was not there with him when he got the reading, but he turned around to the other people that were there, and he told them, "Come look at this." He said, "You see that spike there?" He said, "This is an absolutely dangerous spike of electromagnetic activity coming out of the ground." He said, "That's equal to or slightly over some bolts of lightning." He said, "That's dangerous." And so he has also done Geiger counter readings there, and he's found some of the gamma rays and radiation spikes that come out of the ground, which we've encountered too with our Geiger counter. Not so much. He actually claims to have actually been burned by radiation on Bradshaw Ranch. He had a burn on his leg that concerned him greatly. And he had a bad experience out there about a month ago, where he thinks it's the government. He was flying his drone over the property, and something seized control of his drone and started flying his drone away from him. And,
yeah, I remember seeing that one of his Facebook posts. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he was very concerned about that, and he told me, he said, "You know what, I don't think I'm going to go out there for a while, Jeremiah." He said, I think this is the government activity that you're talking about. And he said, "I don't think they want me there."
Huh.
And I said, "Ben, you've had encounters before, didn't you?" And he did. He was out on Bill Gray Road with some of his equipment many years ago, before I even moved here. It was in the early 1990s, I think he said. And he had just set up his equipment on a folding table, and a Black Hawk helicopter flew over him. And it started to descend right over top of him and his table, to a point where the down thrust from the downdraft from the rotors toppled his table, blew his computer over, and blew his papers everywhere. And he waved at them saying, "I got the hint, I'm out of here." And he packed up all of his gear and left. And so he knew, even way before I did, that there is a government presence here. And depending on what you're looking into, if they don't want you looking into something, they will stop you. They somehow knew that he was out there and on Bill Gray Road. This is a very rural road.
Huh. Wow.
And they wanted to stop him.
How about
his recent investigation out there with a friend of his, it wasn't even a month ago, his drone got away from him, and he was very upset. And he told me, "Jeremiah, I don't think I'm going to go out there because," he said, "I know drones very well." And he said, "My drone was not malfunctioning. Somebody seized control of it." And he said, "I was just lucky that I was able to get it back." And I said, well, Ben, I know that Bradshaw Ranch is monitored, as is the surrounding terrain. There's a frequency that's beamed down by satellite, which the Beyond Skinwalker crew had accidentally tapped into. And it's a frequency that only the military can use. And I think when it was first developed in the early 80s, they nicknamed it the Ear of God, because part of Operation Reforger was this satellite that could listen to the Soviet side of Checkpoint Charlie in areas where they knew there were tanks. And the Russians had something like 5,000 or 6,000 tanks to deploy. We didn't have near that many. And so this Ear of God device was a laser. It was concentrated enough that they could focus it on the areas where they knew tanks were kept. And if these tanks were started and being moved around, this laser frequency would feel the vibration of their motors and feel the vibration on the ground. And the satellite would read that, and it would send that data to a CIC, or Combat Information Center. That was in the early 80s. And the Ear of God technology that they have now is so good that they could even focus it on a wide area and hear two people whispering to each other and record every word they say. And that, for some reasons that we're still giving conjecture at, that same technology is being focused on the Bradshaw Ranch area and the ranches immediately around it. And the guys from the Beyond Skinwalker team picked up on it, and I think it was the former CIA man, Andrew Bustamante. He said, "You know what this is?" He said, "We've just been burned." And the rest of the team said, what do you mean?" He said, "We've been burned. We've been being listened to the entire time we're here. Every word we've spoken is being recorded."
Wow.
So he made it clear that somebody is using that really incredible technology, very expensive technology, to monitor the ranches and the area around it. The question is why? If they have absolute control over most of the properties in this area, many of which they have seized and fenced off, why did they need to listen in to the other properties around the area which they've focused less attention on, like the Bradshaw Ranch? It's no longer really a focus of their security concerns. And I suspect, I was telling Ben, I think they've left Bradshaw Ranch open to the public on purpose, because they know that there's it's kind of a new age connection, if you will, but there's people that are drawn to the ranch. Something calls them to come to the ranch. They feel compelled to come there. Sometimes they're people from New England. Sometimes they're people from around the country. They just get this feeling, I know I have to visit this Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona, Arizona. And they go there and they start either feeling telepathic impulses, they start feeling telepathic messages, possibly from the portal site that's there. I think that's why the ranch is open. I think that's why that Ear of God technology is focused on the property. I think it's being monitored. I think they're listening to people that go there. And if people there receive some sort of data or some sort of interaction from these entities, they're listening. And if it's something that interests them very much, they'll probably step in. If it's something that just already confirms things they already know, they just add it to their database of the research they've already done in that area. But I really think that's one of the reasons why the Bradshaw Ranch, even though it's not recommended that people go there, it's not really monitored that strongly. The guys from the Beyond Skinwalker team asked Alexander and I, have you ever seen anyone from NAU here or the Sega team? I said, no, we're here once or twice a week for 10 years. At the time when they came, we had been there for once a week for 10 years, sometimes twice a week. We never saw anybody. We never saw anyone in government cars. We never saw anyone at that time. We've since then had. But the place was a ghost town. There was never anybody there. They might occasionally find another researcher or another curious person visiting the ranch, but there was never anyone else there. But what we do know now is that for some reason, this particular frequency or this monitoring satellite is listening to every word that is said on the ranch.
Kind of like, kind of makes you think of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Devil's Tower, you know, the guy with the mashed potatoes. This means something. You know?
Very much, very much. And that's one of the reasons that movie it came out the year I was born, at 77, I think. I saw it in a drive-in theater when I was little, and there was something about that movie that really struck a chord. It really, it still does. Alexander and I bought a copy of that movie. It's a 4K copy, and we watched it on our flat screen. And it put both of us in tears, because there's a touch of realism to the movie that I think speaks for all of humankind. And part of that quality that movie expresses is there's a need to know the truth. There's also the knowledge that our government, though primarily the government does work for us, there's a large portion of the government that does not work for us and keeps secrets that we should know. And I think so many of the truths of that movie touches the hearts of not just Americans, but anyone in any country that reads it, that humankind as a whole has one weakness. We all want to know the truth. We all want to be exposed to the truth. And I think we all know deep down inside that sometimes the truth isn't something that we're going to really approve of.
Yeah,
but
well,
regardless as to the truth.
Well, I know that there's a story that Ronald Reagan had a private showing of Close Encounters, you know, in the White House after the movie came out, and Steven Spielberg got to talk with him, and presumably the story that Steven Spielberg told was that after showing the movie that Ronald Reagan said, you know, there's more truth to that movie than, you know, you may realize.
I'll be darned. Interesting, too, that of all presidents, that came from Ronald Reagan, because, you know, he was the one that was starting the Star Wars program, and there's so much more intrigue in relation to the UFO program and the underhandedness of the government in retrieving crashed aircraft or spacecraft or interdimensional craft and reverse engineering. I mean, he knew a lot more than he was able to say.
If I remember right, too, I think out in California, he was flying somewhere and saw a UFO, seems like.
All the time. I didn't know that.
I,
That's even better yet.
I think might have been in Saga magazine or Saga's UFO report years ago, back in the
Yeah.
70s. But
Oh my gosh. I'll have to look that up. That's very curious.
yeah,
Very, very curious.
but
Brent, I also want to let you know too, if you see any photographs that I have on social media, and you can use them, by all means, go ahead and copy them. And I think in some cases I have sketches of things that I've seen. If you could use those, by all means, feel free to use those as well.
all right. Well, I sincerely appreciate it. Also, the other thing I wanted to ask, I know I gotta, it's getting on to 3 hours, but
Okay.
triangular aircraft that may be government, the TR or whatever, that are, seen periodically. And I know there's a site in Arkansas, I've been told, where they been a lot of these aircraft seen. One time flew over a hill that supposedly at one time was an underground ancient volcano, and there's lots of quartz crystals. People come and get them, but they also see Bigfoot and strange lights, and someone even that owns the property and a friend recently claimed that they, in fact I just interviewed them, walked into like a portal. It was a bright light, and they went
Oh my
into it.
gosh.
And one ended, they saw different things. They thought it felt like 5 minutes, but it was actually over an hour of missing
Wow.
time. And one claimed a Bigfoot was behind him, and the other one just saw like people, human people around him, and they just kind of bits and pieces of memory. And there was a former major in the army who's been going around the country investigating. He went there a few years ago and spent quite a bit of time, and he said there was like this triangular type aircraft that came over, and it blotted out the stars, and it was like 200 feet off the ground over the top of the hill, and then it went off toward Oklahoma, which this is like the western part of Arkansas, so it wasn't too far, and people were reporting it over there. And he told me that the MUFON has had a number of reports of these aircraft around there. He believes that they're military, and they're just kind of surveilling the activity, and keeping an eye on it. And anyway, a lot of Native Americans have been going there, and this owner who also walked into the portal says that a few years ago he was out with some Indians, and a Bigfoot came up out of the ravine about 12 foot tall, and he said they didn't seem startled at all, but he was like all excited, saying, "You see this? You see this? Look!" And,
Oh, it's fantastic.
yeah, and,
Well,
and, and they put me in touch with, I haven't talked with him yet, but some information on a Choctaw Cherokee law
oh yeah.
enforcement officer who's chasing Bigfoot, and he's been to their location and seen, I think he's seen like a Bigfoot, and also a rock that levitated up in the air and then dropped to the ground.
Oh my goodness.
They've had that sort of activity going on, so
That is
it's
fantastic. The triangular craft that you mentioned has been seen here. I saw one on one occasion, and that was at Bradshaw Ranch. Alexandra was with me. And she also saw one. She was actually driving down 179 into the village of Oak Creek, and she got to where the famous Bell Rock is.
uh-huh.
And she had, at the time, she had on her Honda Civic. And she looked through the moonroof of the Honda Civic, and she saw one right above the moonroof. It wasn't even that high up, right? You could see the triangular shape and the light or something. She said it was about 100 feet up. It was very, very low.
Oh wow.
And then recently, I don't know if you saw. I posted a video that was taken by my boss's father-in-law as he was driving toward Cottonwood from Sedona, and he saw a whole squadron of UAPs, if you will, roughly over the Camp Verde area as he was driving toward Cottonwood. He was just passing the Page Springs Road exit as he shot video from his phone while he was driving. And she showed it to me, and she said, "What do you make of this?" I said, "Well, those are UAPs, and you need to share that with somebody." I said, "Would you send that to me, and may I have permission to share it with fellow researchers?" And she said, absolutely. So she sent it to me, and I shared it with Tom Dargo and a few others. And then I was glad to see that not only he saw it, but it was posted on the Sedona bulletin board. So hundreds of people saw it, and one man was watching it with his whole family on their deck. And when those lights started to move from the Camp Red area, they moved east. And this man's family watched all these orbs, these big balls of light,